do, I'll tell how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, my name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. Today, reactionaries are upset that a transgender person is existing. Adam has some more thoughts on education. Trump wants to cut Social Security, all that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number, and the line is open, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857 is the phone number. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online. TVLR.fm is our website. You can find our newsletter there. We are on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, wherever you get your podcasts, all at The Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. We are on 4 radio stations in 3 states, and that is not free. So if you want to help us stay on the air, tvlr.fm/donate is where you'll do that. You can make a one-time or monthly recurring contribution. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report, or you could buy our merch, folks. We have pre-orders for our logo dad cap. Our logo cap is back up. We have pre-orders open for that. So you can do that at tvlr.fm/store. We will be placing the order next week. So if you want to make sure that you get your TVLR logo cap, you want to do it now before we place the order. We're going to be ordering extras, but to guarantee that you get one, place the order now. This is only the second time that we've run this order for the logo cap, and the last time that we did it was almost 3 years ago. Okay, so we do not do this very often, and we get requests for the logo cap a lot. So if you want one, now's the time. tvlr.fm/store, $35 plus shipping, union made in the USA, unlike some conservative, patriotic politicians who thump their chest about how they love the American worker and then have all of their campaign signs and campaign merchandise made by slaves in Vietnam. That's not us, folks. Union made in the USA. tvlr.fm/store. $35 plus shipping. Or if you're in Huntsville, if you're in the Huntsville area and you know us, or if you feel reasonably confident that we're going to be running into each other at some point, and you're fine with that weight, you can just order the local pickup, and it's $35 even, and we'll just hand it over to you at some point. So tvlr.fm/store. If you're a member of a union, please think about getting your local to sponsor the show. We could not do this without our union sponsors. You can reach out to us for more details on that. We have lots of union sponsors, and we're getting more, and we've had some come on and drop off, so we could always use more, and we could always be in more places. So if you're in a union local that is outside of our terrestrial listening area, and you think that, hey, it would be good for folks to just be able to get in the car and turn on their radio and hear union talk, reach out to us, and we can try to find how much it would cost to get on the radio in your area, right? So we can, there's all sorts of stuff that we can do. If you're in the area and you like the show and you want it to be on the radio more, then There's opportunities for that too. We have opportunity. We could be a daily show. There are opportunities for that in Huntsville. We could be a daily radio program, but the thing that's holding us up is the money. Okay, that's the. I don't know. There was an idiom or something that I was looking for and I couldn't find it, but you know what I'm talking about. It's the money. If we have the money, we could be a daily radio program. So if that's something that you would like to see and you hold the purse strings in a union, then, we can make it happen.
That's right, folks. And let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just some diehard union activists who believe that the South's labor movement really deserves a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener. We appreciate you spending some time with us.
So every single week, workers are on the move. They are winning union elections, filing for union elections. They're bargaining contracts. They're winning contracts. Legislation is being introduced to help or hurt us, and not enough attention is paid for it. So every week we open the show with a rapid-fire segment about what happened last week in Southern labor. So here's what workers in the U.S. South and American colonies were up to from March the 8th to the 15th. In new union campaigns, the employer filed for a union election after a majority of the 73 workers at Transdev Services in Houston, Texas, demonstrated support for unionization with the Teamsters, Local 988. 3 workers at the Cesar Chavez Foundation in Austin, Texas, again filed a petition to hold a union election with Lone Star Labor Education and again withdrew the petition. This is very bizarre behavior from this bargaining unit. I'm not sure what's going on there. 400 workers at United Football League Enterprises in Arlington, Texas, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Steelworkers, USW, Local 9004. 8 workers at Wells Fargo Bank in Apex, North Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with Wells Fargo Workers United, a CWA affiliate, as did 8 more workers at a Wells Fargo location in Cedar Hill, Texas, and 10 more workers at a Wells Fargo location in Bellevue, Florida. This campaign is really picking up steam. So if you are a Wells Fargo worker and you're listening to this and you think that you could use a union, reach out to the union. Wells Fargo Workers United. This campaign is one like the Starbucks campaign that's really taking off, it seems. 99 workers at Flight Safety International in Savannah, Georgia, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW. 8 workers at Second Chance Animal Rescue in Norman, Oklahoma, filed a petition to hold a union election with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME. In campaign updates, Hyundai has begun offering employees subsidized child care amid the union campaign to try to stave off unionization. In election results, it was a pretty bleak week, I have to say. 3 groups of workers withdrew their petition for a union election last week. 6 workers at Arcola in Harrison, Arkansas, with Teamsters Local 373, and 20 workers at Houston Landing in Houston, Texas, with the Media Guild of the West, News Guild, CWA, as did 28 workers at another location of Houston Landing in San Antonio, Texas. 133 security guards at Loomis Armored US, LLC, in Atlanta, Georgia, voted in favor of unionizing with the Security, Police, and Fire Professionals of America, SPFPA. Workers in Charlottesville, Virginia's Public Works Department, Department of Parks and Recreation, Department of Public Utilities, Fire Department, and Office of Community Solutions voted to unionize with the Teamsters Local 29. 55 workers at Jupiter Aluminum Corporation in Wellsburg, West Virginia voted 15-34 against unionization with the USW. 674 workers at Westinghouse Electric Company in Hopkins, South Carolina, voted against unionization 246-379 with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW. 27 workers at Southeastern Paper Group in College Park, Georgia, voted against unionization with the Teamsters Local 528. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, Waffle House workers in Tennessee filed 2 lawsuits against the company alleging wage theft. In strikes and bargaining updates, Teamsters Local 688 at Gray Bar in St. Louis, Missouri are still on strike, as are Teamsters at Molson Coors, and they're calling for a boycott of the brand. So don't buy Molson Coors products, folks. The members of Workers United Local 4 at the Marshall's Distribution Center in Bridgewater, Virginia, voted overwhelmingly to ratify their new contract, with one worker saying, quote, "I have worked here for 38 years, and nothing compares to this contract." AFGE members recently ratified what the union is calling a, quote, groundbreaking collective bargaining agreement with the TSA. In politics and legislation, Republicans in the U.S. House are subpoenaing a union local because they don't like a resolution that the union local overwhelmingly democratically passed. An Alabama library board fired the director, and workers closed the library in protest. In response, the 4 workers were also terminated by the board. CWA Local 3905 endorsed Maryland lands for State House District 10 in Huntsville, Alabama. And pretty short week for Southern Labor last week. If we missed anything, let us know, tvlr.fm/contact, and we can include it in next week's roundup. We're going to head to a break, and we're going to be right back. We have a lot to talk about with the space camp situation. We have an announcement about East Palestine, and we wanted to make sure that folks, especially on the conservative radio station that we are on, knew that Trump wants to cut Social Security. We're going to talk about all of that when we return. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Cure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Cure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law, the name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison here with Adam Keller. Folks, appreciate you tuning in. We've got about 20 people watching us on the YouTube and not as many likes. So if you have not liked the stream yet, please do that. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Mel and Joe on the Facebook chat. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Have a fellow in the YouTube chat that says he has just filled out paperwork to try to get the UAW election at his workplace outside by the Hyundai plant, the Glovis plant right next door to Hyundai. So that's really exciting. Looking forward to seeing that campaign progress. TVLR.fm/store if you haven't bought our new hat or our old hat. It's the exact same. It's the same producer, it's the same design, it's going to have the same bug, it's the same style of cap, it's exactly the same as the one that we did 3 years ago. So tvlr.fm/store if you want to place your pre-order. We're going to be placing those that order at the end of the week. Let's see. So East Palestine, we are now a little over the first anniversary of the disaster that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, where a Norfolk Southern train derailed, spilling a bunch of toxic chemicals, and then, in order to clear the tracks more quickly, Norfolk Southern decided to detonate the toxic materials. Since then, it has later come to light that that was not necessary. That was 100% unnecessary to do, to detonate these, to burn these chemicals. That was totally unnecessary, and because of that, there's all sorts of chemicals in the air in the town, and it has caused an increase of disease, and people worried especially about long-term effects. This is a very serious situation, and there are people now in East Palestine and across the country that are calling on Joe Biden to declare the East Palestine, the disaster, a mass casualty incident site. There's going to be a big event next Saturday, March 23rd, 2024 at 12 noon in East Palestine, Ohio. But if you're not in East Palestine and you can't attend in person, you can endorse the campaign initiated by Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers by contacting Chris at 724-650-0304. Again, you can contact Chris at 724-650-0304 to endorse the campaign to have President Joe Biden make East Palestine a mass casualty incident site. You can also email him at albright1776 at comcast.net. That is ALBRIGHT 1776 at comcast.net. If you individually or an organization that you are a part of would like to endorse this campaign, and you should, then please reach out to those folks, because like I said, there are some serious health effects that are being felt by the residents of the town because of the corporate greed of Norfolk Southern. You know, in addition to the fact that the burning of the toxic chemicals did not have to happen. They could have been cleaned another way, in a way that would be less detrimental to the health and safety of the residents. That could have happened if it was allowed to proceed in a more careful and slow and methodical way. But Norfolk Southern wanted to open the tracks as soon as possible so that they could again begin carrying lots of stuff through East Palestine so that they could continue to make more profits. That is why the toxic chemicals were burned in East Palestine, not because that had to happen. And that's official. That has come out recently. There's official reports. Totally unnecessary. There were better ways to do it. In addition to that, the incident happening at all is a result of the greed and corporate negligence on behalf of Norfolk Southern. Remember, we had a big, long interview, and you can find this. You can just search YouTube, The Valley Labor Report, East Palestine. We've talked to railroad workers about how Norfolk Southern's corporate policies have been decreasing emphasis on safety, on appropriate staffing, on worker well-being, and all of those are combining to make crashes like these, derailments, more likely and more numerous. And in fact, since East Palestine, every other rail company besides Norfolk Southern has seen an increase in derailments. Norfolk Southern, because of all the eyes on that company in particular, has decreased their derailments, but not by enough, and they haven't done enough changes to their corporate culture to actually fix the root of the problem. But every other train company has actually increased derailments since East Palestine. It's just an insane state of affairs that they are being allowed to do this, and to not only put the workers in harm's way, but communities like East Palestine. Absolutely unacceptable. And the federal government should be stepping in the whole broad situation. The federal government should step in and declare East Palestine a mass casualty incident site because, and I didn't say why that's important. That's important because that opens up federal funds to provide for health care and, obviously property values in East Palestine have plummeted because are you going to go and buy a house in East Palestine right now? Probably not, right? Property values have plummeted, and so declaring it a mass casualty incident site will help families recoup some of these costs and will help provide for the provision of health care, which those bills are adding up for so many families, and a lot of these families are going into debt because of the health care costs. And so it's incredibly important that Joe Biden do this. But then even beyond that, like I said, and I explained, there's a huge broader, more systemic issue on the rails in this country that need to be addressed by the Department of Transportation and by the National Transportation and Safety Board. They need to come down like a hammer on all of these companies and, show them that the United States government takes it seriously when you put our workers in danger and when you put our communities in danger. We should not allow this to continue, and these companies should have the books thrown at them every time there is a derailment that could have been prevented, which is the vast majority of derailments. Every single time it happens, they should have the book thrown at them. So we're obviously going to keep track of this situation. We have on April the 6th, so like 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're going to be talking to railroad workers again because their contract negotiations are coming back up. So we're going to be talking to them about some of the issues and some of the ways that their union and the workers affected are trying to fight back against these systemic issues. And so, mark your calendars for that because that's going to be a good conversation. Railroad Workers United always sends good folks, knowledgeable folks to talk about this. Just absolutely unacceptable stuff going on. So reach out to the folks involved in this campaign to declare East Palestine a mass casualty incident site, and don't let the pressure up because this is should not be allowed to continue this situation. Okay, so there we go. Now here in Huntsville, we have had an incident at Space Camp. That has really captured the imagination of a lot of our pundit class and politicians, if you can imagine that. And it's not... It's so frustrating because there are so many real issues in the state of Alabama that politicians could be focusing on, but they're not. Instead, they're focusing on the situation at Space Camp. And literally within 24 hours of some of this stuff going viral on Facebook, you had Congress people and senators coming out with statements about this. It's absolutely ridiculous. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about there is an employee at Space Camp who is transgender. And that's it. That's it. That's all that it is, frankly. And I'll tell you why I know that's all that it is here in a little bit. But I don't want people to see this segment or hear this segment and think that I'm glossing over some of the other stuff. And so I want to address some of the other stuff. Some of the additional claims about this situation are that this transgender woman walked in the hallway of the girls' dorms, which is like, what? Walking into, performing duties as a hall monitor? You're upset about that? That's bizarre. Like that, if I'm imagining this correctly, there's a hallway and then the dorms with the doors are closed, right? And so you're walking. I mean, a man could perform that duty. This is just a bizarre thing to be upset about. But okay, so there you go. That's one of the things that people are really upset about, is that a transgender woman was walking down the hallway of the girls' dorms to make sure that everything was okay. Very upset about that. Here's another one. The transgender employee, quote, went into the girls' changing area to instruct the people at Space Camp, the girls, to hurry up as they are changing or doing whatever they're doing. And now went into, what does that mean? I don't know. Does it mean that this employee just creaked open the door and they're looking out in the hallway and they're saying, hey, let's hurry up. We got to be at this thing in, a little bit. Is that it? Or did this person, go into the girls' changing area, and like look at every single girl like, you need to hurry up. You need to hurry up. The second one, I would say, would probably be inappropriate for anybody, right? I don't know exactly how these things work, but, that just seems like maybe that's, that sounds weird for any adult to be doing in a minor's changing area. But, look, I'm not sure what exactly the policies are around that. And then there's another one. She had a, quote, gender is a universe. There's a sticker that had like a rainbow, gender is a universe, on her laptop. And they're saying that this is, that this is indicative of her wanting to trans the kids, because she has a sticker on her laptop that says gender is a universe. And she said, quote, that she hopes the kids see it and, quote, is proud of themselves in this big universe. Okay, so there is no indication that she is saying that, I hope that a kid, says, I like your sticker, and then she can go into a tirade about how you need to, be a transgender person. That's how, and go into this whole speech. No indication of that. But just an indication that, look, if you see as a child and you're LGBT and you see that, an adult that you're around has an LGBT sticker, you can, all she is doing there is saying that, like, I hope they feel welcome and I hope they feel proud of themselves as a person, and that, all of this kind of stuff. No indication that there's any instruction going on around that, obviously. And so those are all of the claims. All of the claims. And the only one that is even remotely, that you could even remotely be like, I don't know, maybe that's weird, is walking into the girls' changing area. Did that happen? That is only one allegation on Facebook, on the internet, by some, anonymous person.
A questionable source.
Questionable source, right? But look, is that normal? I don't know. I mean, when I was, now that I'm thinking about it, when I was changing in like PE, I don't think the PE instructors came in. The male PE instructors came in. So I don't know.
See, I remember the opposite.
You remember the opposite?
Yeah, I clearly remember the coaches coming in to tell us to hurry up.
Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe, I don't know. That seems weird. Maybe, maybe there's a policy against that. I don't. Oh, but actually there is a policy against that. Okay, so politicians were just totally incensed by this. U.S. senators, Congress folks releasing statement within the day the story broke. Absolute lunacy, the priorities of these people. But Space Camp has responded, and they've said, okay, look, as a condition of employment, camp staff undergo nationwide criminal background checks, including court records, Department of Corrections data, state sex offender registries from across the country, and multi-panel drug tests. Additionally, staff sleep in separate rooms from students and use separate bathroom facilities. We also provide 24-hour on-site security, including round-the-clock video surveillance, regular foot and vehicle patrols, and controlled campus and building access. The camp does not allow physical contact between staff and students beyond a fist bump or high five, and no staff member is allowed to be alone with a student behind a closed door. There is also no sharing of personal details, including personal phone numbers, email addresses, or social media information. Discussion of religion, sexual topics, politics, or sharing of opinions and beliefs that may be controversial is also prohibited. They have no access to rooms or bathrooms, and when they have to go in the event of an emergency, 2 counselors must be present. Those are the policies of the space camp, and those all seem reasonable. And, look, if a cisgender woman can go into the woman's changing area and say, look, you need to hurry up and then step out, then, that sounds a little weird to me, either a transgender woman or a cisgender woman. But if that happens, then, that is what it is. And it's not a big deal. Like beyond like, is that weird? I don't know. But that is absolutely not a big deal.
And is there any proof any of this happened? Or is it just
exactly? Is there any
ramblings of some guy on Facebook?
Exactly. And so, look, to the extent that there are any allegations of policy being violated, then those are going to be investigated, and those are, and the result of that is gonna happen, whatever it is, right? And they also have a policy about there's a social media policy, and they're not supposed to wear space camp stuff, and we're going to get into that here in just a second, because she had a picture of herself on Twitter in space camp regalia, and so potentially that is a violation of space camp's social media policy, and if it is, then, look, they can say, don't do that again. But does that mean they should fire her? Obviously not, right? Obviously not.
No. I would say in most circumstances,
exactly. You would not be fired.
You would not be fired, even in an at-will environment. Most of the time, you're not going to get fired for a very minor social media violation.
No. And so there we go. That's the whole situation. And so if you're a normal person and you're listening to this, you're going to be like, why are U.S. senators releasing statements within 24 hours of this being made public? Because this is such a nothing burger. Nothing even bad is alleged to have happened. Nothing. This is ridiculous. That this is now a national story because of people hyperventilating about this. And all that this is about is really about her being transgender. That's the whole thing. And now you can say, oh no, it's because I'm worried about her going into, an adult going into minors' dressing rooms. That's what I'm actually worried about. And some people say that, and some people will try to hide behind that. But that's obviously not what it's about. That is not what it's about. And I'll tell you this because Dale Jackson last week tweeted, quote, how many jobs can you keep when you post on social media about how you are, quote, a butch-coated blank queer in your work clothes? 1, space camp child supervisor. Anyone else? And so that's referring to a tweet, to a tweet that this woman tweeted with her picture in her space camp clothes saying that it was only space coated or butch coated space queer. And that was her tweet, right? And so again, if you're a normal person, you're going to look at that or you're going to hear that and say, what's weird about that? What's wrong with that? Because the only thing that you could possibly think is upsetting about that is that this person has publicly identified themselves in their work clothes as queer. Right? That's it. And that is the revelation, because there's nothing in Dale's tweet here about, girls in, people in minors' dressing rooms or anything like this. It's just that this person publicly identified themselves as a part of the LGBT community. And so therefore, they should not be allowed to work with children. And that's it. That's it. That's the exact same stuff that we saw in pink scares of the last century, where in some states there were prohibitions or there were attempts to be prohibitions on homosexual people being school teachers or working in any way with children because of this stereotype of LGBT folks being just automatically by virtue of their existence, child predators. A pervasive stereotype, and that's all that this is. This is playing into this stereotype about LGBT folks being child predators when there is absolutely zero evidence or even zero allegations of this person acting in a way that would indicate that they have any remote interest sexually in children. There's zero evidence or allegations of anything that would indicate that. And so that's the problem that was identified, is this person publicly identified as part of the LGBT community. And so I mentioned that on Twitter. I said that. I was like, I said something to the effect of, and there you go. That's the whole problem. That's all that this is. That's all that this is about, is that this person is publicly identifying themselves as queer. And so therefore they shouldn't be allowed to work with children. And then, Dale comes back and then he tries to backtrack, right? He doesn't defend his original point. He goes back to the other stuff, which is still even in and of itself is not, an issue or, but he goes back to the other stuff without defending his original tweet, because his original tweet is he knows it's not defensible. And so he tried to defend the other stuff, while two of his followers replied to me. The only two people that replied to me that were taking Dale's position agreed with me. They said yes. Quote, people with mental illness should not be around children. Gender dystopia is a mental illness. Here's another one. They shouldn't be allowed to work with children. They're mentally ill. Okay, so just he accidentally revealed the issue, which is that he doesn't believe, or he says publicly that he doesn't believe LGBT folks should be allowed to work with children at all. And when he's called on that, he tries to go back to some other stuff. And his followers are just like, yeah, no, he's right. LGBT folks shouldn't be allowed to work with children at all, because LGBT folks are automatically child predators. And so there you go. That's the whole issue. And that's why I feel it is incumbent on me as an advocate of workers' rights to speak out against this stuff. Because, this kind of stuff is something where I'm probably like one of the areas where I am the least, quote, woke. In that, you might say that, because there are questions that I've asked folks about gender stuff that some people would take offense to, because they would think that, the questions that I've asked are ignorant, or that, that I don't know anything about this stuff, or that I don't understand. And there are things that I do not understand in this area of gender and all that, right? Because, I'm pretty typical white guy, right? And so, look, there's just things that I don't understand about it. But what I do understand, and I don't have to understand it, right? That's the whole thing. I don't have to understand it. And what I do understand is hysterical, anti-worker, pink scare BS. And that's all this is. As long as the facts remain what we have now, there is nothing even remotely serious in the allegations, and she should be left the hell alone, and the people leading this witch hunt against her should shrink back into their caves, ashamed of themselves. That's the state of affairs as I see it. And look, also, it's important to recognize priorities reveal your politics. Priorities reveal your values. Somebody can go down a list and ask you about anything, any question in the world, and you can say, oh, I'm pro-gay rights. I'm pro-gay marriage. I'm pro-abortion. I'm pro-marijuana legalization. And so therefore and a lot of people try to do this. And then they say, therefore I'm on the left, or I'm liberal, or I'm a good person. And then they spend all of their time on nonsense like this, pretending it to be about the children, right? I want to protect the children. While these people did not spend week-long crusades against Hyundai for literally, physically endangering children, right? Do you remember that? A year ago when reporting was coming out about how Hyundai was employing dozens of children as young as 12 in manufacturing facilities that were so dangerous as to be illegal. Multiple OSHA fines over just the last year because of amputation hazards and crush hazards. 12-year-olds working in this environment, literally, physically in danger. And you might, maybe have heard an offhand condemnation of it in that, oh, that's not good. They shouldn't do that. And then they'll go on to talking about some other nonsense that doesn't affect anybody, right? So if you are going on about this, talking about how you want to protect the children, and you did not spend at least the same amount of time attacking Hyundai for physically endangering children, or attacking Steve Marshall for not investigating this, or for not even talking about it, or for not charging any of the management at Hyundai with child endangerment, that's hypocritical. And people listening to you should question how much of this is actually about you wanting to protect the children, and how much of this is just about your own insecurities and your own ignorance and, like I said, like me, right? Your own, you don't understand some of this stuff and you feel like it's icky, and so then you are projecting all of that onto society, and you feel like society should have to adhere to your whatever hang-ups you have, even though there's no evidence of any wrongdoing or impropriety or anything like that. People should question that. People should question that. When you're talking about protecting the children, what is the things that you're actually spending your time on? Because that is what reveals your values.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable that you had a congressman and a senator, hurrying to put out statements about nothing, about just the very existence of a trans person around children. Yeah, they were really quick to put out statements on that, but the reality is that Alabama's children live in some of the worst conditions in the entire developed world. Would you know that from their statements?
Right.
Would you know that from their actions? Right? What about the children in Alabama who suffer day in and day out as a result of our policies, the deliberate public policy choices? And, attacks like this are happening on workers in their workplace. We also have attacks in state capitals across the South and around the country. You have reactionary legislators who are targeting LGBT folks. They're targeting women's rights. They're targeting intellectual freedom. They're cranking out a whole slew of backwards proposals that really try to make life harder for vulnerable groups of people.
Right.
While trying to increase the division within our society, right? And trying to divide us. And as working people, we can't fall for these tricks. We can't let our class be divided, regardless of gender, religion, ethnicity, immigration status, education background. At the end of the day, the vast majority of people here in Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, wherever you're at, the vast majority of people are working class. We have nothing to sell but our labor. We are the majority. And it's up to us and our unions to make sure that we unite as a majority, because it's our labor that spins the wheels of the economy in our society. And as working people, we have more in common with each other, despite our differences, than we do with the bosses and the politicians. And so, we have to make sure we oppose any attempts to divide us or to target groups of us. We have to ensure that our unions are fighting hard against these sort of efforts. And that's why, workers need unions to protect them from these kind of attacks on your identity and attacks in the workplace. When you get targeted by folks, you need a union to have your back. And so we definitely extend our support and solidarity to all of our fellow workers, even if they don't look like us or think like us or talk like us, because the answer to bigotry is solidarity. That's what it's all about. You have to be willing to stand up for folks, even if you don't fully understand what they're going through. You know, even if it's a battle that seems like it's maybe not your battle, but ultimately an injury to one is an injury to all. And so when these far-right people, these special interest groups and, you know, talking heads want to try to target trans folks and queer folks and other minorities, it's really an attack on all of us, because it's trying to get all of us attacking each other. And ultimately, we know that one of the best weapons available for working people to fight discrimination in the workplace and in the economy is the collective power of our unions. Unions can help us build power, build relationships and solidarity amongst each other to withstand some of these bigoted attacks. And we have to organize working people around our common interest, right? We all have an interest in being able to go to our job and do our job and be left alone and not be targeted by some creeps on the internet, right? Or folks with a talk show. We have to have each other's back when it comes to that. So yeah, I believe that y'all means all. Human rights are not negotiable. So I stand with this worker and with all workers who are being targeted. Everybody deserves dignity and respect, and I don't think that's a lot to ask.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And you know, my all of my solidarity with this woman and her. You know, I cannot imagine what it's like to go through this, having, you know, people calling for strangers, folks from across the country calling for my firing at, you know, minimum, right? I mean, that's kind of that's kind of the tame end of you know, how people are talking about this person.
Yeah. Can I add something else? Something else I just thought of was, you know, it's real interesting the timing of this, because this came out around the same time some other news came out about a local Republican leader who has been charged with murder and sexual torture. Now, you heard that right. Murder and sexual torture. And this person was a campaign manager.
The former president of the Madison County Young Republicans.
This gentleman was very involved in Republican politics in North Alabama. And I didn't see, you know, Congressman Dale Strong make a video or a statement about this. I didn't see Dale Jackson make a video about it. Maybe they did, and I missed it. Mm-hmm. But this is someone who is one of their peers, who runs in the same circles as them, and who allegedly committed murder and sexual torture. It's a very shocking case. So I encourage folks, if you can stomach it, to look it up. But, you know, I just think the timing of, I'm not saying there's anything to that, but it's just interesting that the dynamics of, and the disparate treatment, right? You've got a controversy over nothing. Meanwhile, you've got someone, one of your own people,
right,
one of your own leaders, committing some of the most heinous acts you could imagine, right?
And like zero indication of any introspection. Like, how did this guy who would do this? I mean, really, the things that he put this fellow through before he killed him or after he killed him is like Adam said. I mean, some of the most, you know, horrific kind of stuff that you can imagine. And so the person who would do something like that is obviously not a normal person, right? There is no way that, you know, I don't know. I don't want to speak too broadly. You know, I think that people can put on masks, but it just seems strange. It would seem like there would be some red flags, and so, you know, not really any indication of like, oh wow, how did we miss that, right, among these people? How did we miss that? You know, I spent so much time with this person, had this guy manage my campaign. Elected this person. If I'm a young Republican in Madison County, I elected this person to be my president.
Right.
How did I miss this? How did I miss that? Not any indication of any introspection there.
Right. Yeah, and I just thought that contrast is worth bringing up, right? So, so there we go. But again, the answer to bigotry is solidarity. You don't have to fully understand everybody and know what they're going through, because at the end of the day, you can never know what other people are fully going through. No matter how similar you may be or different you may be, all you can know is that we're all human and we're all struggling with a lot of the same crap and the same system and the same, bosses and politicians. So all we can do is try to have each other's back.
Donald Trump last week has floated now cutting Social Security. And this is kind of a departure, at least from his rhetoric, and we'll talk about, is it a departure from his actual policies here in a second, but it's at least a departure from his rhetoric, where he has consistently said, we're not going to touch Social Security. Social Security is off of the table. Never going to cut it. We're going to keep it. We're going to make it strong. We're going to make it the strongest Social Security. And so he has departed from that rhetoric. I know he must have been talking to Stephen Mnuchin or something too much, but here he was on CNBC being asked about that specifically, and let's listen to what he said.
One thing that I think that at least the perception is that there's not a whole lot of difference between what you think we should do with entitlements or non-discretionary spending and what President Biden is proposing. It's almost the third rail of politics. And we've got a $34 trillion total debt built up, and very little we can do in terms of cutting spending. Discretionary is not going to help. Have you changed your outlook on how to handle entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Mr. President? It seems like something has to be done, or else we're going to be stuck at 120% of debt to GDP forever.
So first of all, there is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting, and in terms of also the theft and the bad management of entitlements.
So there you go. Lots of things that you can do in terms of cutting. I mean, that's pretty, pretty unambiguous there. That he is, at the very least, open to cutting Social Security. And this is the thing that frustrates me about Republicans on this issue, is that, they pretend like they're not. They'll say things like this, like, oh, I'm for, I would be in favor of reform or whatever. And then you get them in a less friendly, they might say stuff like that in front of their, business freaks, like on CNBC. But then if you get them in front of a less friendly crowd, oh, no, I would never cut Social Security, despite the fact that actually in one of Donald Trump's budgets, he did call for cutting Social Security and Medicare. And now he's calling for it in interviews. And the Republican Study Caucus has called for it every single year, called for a 20% cut in Social Security and Medicare. In every single year that they put out a budget, they're calling for it. And then, right-wingers on the radio or when they're penning op-eds are going to try to pretend that, oh, no, Republicans would never cut it. It's just the most bizarre thing that I see in politics, is this two-facedness about this issue, saying that we have to cut it, it's the responsible thing to do, and then in other times saying, oh, no, we would never do that. That's totally off the table. But when they are, when they're looking out the side of their face where they're saying we need to cut it, their reasoning for that is that we have to, right? That we have to, that we are in so much debt, and the host mentioned it there, we're in so much debt, we're spending so much that it's just impossible. This is an impossible thing to have to keep doing. And what they won't tell you is that there is a cap on Social Security taxes. It's like $250,000 or something. So you pay your Social Security tax up to your $250,000th dollar. On your $250,000 and first dollar, you stop paying Social Security taxes for every dollar after that. So a millionaire, a person who is making $1 million a year, only pays Social Security and Medicare taxes on the first $250,000.
I thought it was less than that, honestly.
It may be less than that. I don't know. But just, it's not, it's there's a cap on it. I'm not sure. It's somewhere around $200,000, $150,000, something like that. And every dollar after that is not taxed at Social Security. All you would have to do to make, and the thing that they'll quote is that, Social Security is going to be insolvent by 2034 in 10 years. At that point, they're going to have to cut the law. The provision is automatically you cut by 20% the payouts. And so that's the thing. That's the nightmare scenario. All you have to do to prevent that from happening and make Social Security solvent for 80 years, for almost 100 years, is remove the cap. That's literally all you have to do. You don't even have to make rich people pay more as a percentage of their income than the rest of us do, right? People love flat taxes. That's one of the things that right-wingers are always talking about. If we just extended the Social Security tax to every income level, then Social Security is solvent for nearly 100 years. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that because they like being able to make all this money without having to pay Social Security taxes. That is the easiest solution to it, where you don't have to cut benefits for working people, where you and it's solvent. But it's the easiest solution to the crisis. You just make wealthy people pay the same Social Security taxes that the rest of us do, and then Social Security and Medicare solvent, basically, for 100 years. But they don't want to do that because they don't want their donors to have to pay more taxes, and that's why this conversation keeps on being had. And so it's very frustrating. But I encourage people to not believe it. To not believe the things that they hear when people are talking about Social Security is going to go bankrupt. We have to cut it because if we don't, Social Security is going to go bankrupt. No, that's not true. We can just raise taxes. We can just make wealthy people pay the same amount as you do. And then we would save Social Security. We're going to head to a break. We're going to be right back. Adam has some more thoughts on education in the wake of the school choice bill that passed in Alabama a couple of weeks back. And then we're going to hit Boss Watch. So don't go anywhere, folks. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with Adam Keller. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. TVLR.fm/store is where you can pre-order your hat, and TVLR.fm/donate is where you can make a donation to the program. Got a quick story from Japan that I wanted to fill y'all in on. It's pretty cool. This is coming from, where did I see this? What was the news outlet? It was
it Japan Times?
I pulled it from Nikkei Asia. Japan's largest labor federation said Friday that its members won an average 5.28 increase in wages this year, the biggest raise since 1991, providing impetus for a possible interest rate hike by the Bank of Japan next week. Every spring, unions and management hold talks known as shunto to set monthly wages ahead of the start of Japan's fiscal year in April. Negotiations at some of the country's biggest companies, including Toyota, Hitachi, and Panasonic, concluded with many fully meeting union demands. Nippon Steel exceeded demands, which that is bizarre, raising monthly wages by a record 14%. That's pretty impressive. And Nippon Steel is the company that was potentially going to be buying U.S. steel. Folks will remember, but it looks like that deal is in severe danger. The 7 million member Japanese Trade Union Confederation, or Rengo, announced its first tally of the results on Friday, covering 771 unions. The hike, which includes increases in base pay and seniority-based hikes, was 1.48 percentage points higher than last year. The results are a, quote, worthy start to a stage change for Japan, Rengo President Tomoko Yoshino said at a news conference on Friday. The fact that labor and management at each of the affiliated unions deepened their recognition that increased investment in human resources is indispensable and has important implications for sustainable wage increases in the coming years. The wave of wage increases takes place against the backdrop of a deepening labor shortage, persistent inflation, and a weak yen that has boosted the profits of export-oriented companies. Even though only about 16% of Japanese workers belong to labor unions, economists have been following this year's shunto as a key indicator of changes in monetary policy. So that's pretty interesting. It seems like there are potentially you could be seeing It seems like the Bank of Japan is kind of the Federal Reserve equivalent for the Japanese, and they may be going about some monetary policy to try to tampen down on a hot labor market in the same way that the Federal Reserve tried to do here in the United States, to try to tamp down on inflation. We'll see what happens there and what the results of that would be. But, on its face, pretty exciting for Japanese workers to get that kind of a raise and to be able to win those kind of concessions at the bargaining table. And, things like that are what inspire people to join unions. So we may see, it would be great to see an organizing wave in Japan as a result of this, like we're seeing in the automotive industry as a result of the UAW contract campaign. So
Right, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on that. But Adam, a week and a half ago, school choice passed. School choice, quote unquote, passed, and that's been celebrated by Americans for Prosperity, which that's if Americans for Prosperity is celebrating it, it's terrible. And the Retirement Systems of Alabama has criticized the voucher-like system. So, in the wake of this, I'm interested in, you said that you had some other thoughts on education in the state. So what are you thinking as we move further out from the passage of the quote-unquote school choice bill and closer to its actual implementation?
Right. Yeah, and I did want to highlight that the support by the Americans for Prosperity, which is one of these, shadowy billionaire-backed groups. I believe the Koch family is who funds them, if I'm not mistaken. But the Retirement System of Alabama coming out and criticizing this new law, I think, is important. A lot of educators really pay attention when Dr. David Bronner speaks, as he's the CEO of RSA, has been a long-time successful CEO of the retirement system. So, I think that's worth noting. There's concerns that, the more you weaken the public school system, ultimately that trickles into the pension system. And the state's pension system is very successful. It's actually kind of a success story here in Alabama. The fact that public employees have maintained a defined benefit pension, that the pension system is financially stable. So, keep your eyes on that for sure. But I did want to think about kind of moving forward and just put some alternative ideas out there that I think are missing from this conversation about school choice. Public schools are the cornerstone of a community, and they're critical to a democratic society. In this, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, an excellent public education for all should be a fundamental right. And yet, across the country and right here in Alabama, public education is under attack. We're seeing bills that target educators and their ability to teach truthfully, and while also pushing offensive, ridiculous narratives about what's happening inside public school classrooms. Essential values of diversity, equity, and inclusion are being banned, while LGBTQ folks are being demonized. Public schools are charged to do right by every child, regardless of their background, but too many of Alabama's legislators are determined to sabotage this mission. While trafficking in fake news and stoking divisive cultural resentment, Governor Kay Ivey and the Alabama Republican leadership are also celebrating passage of the CHOOSE Act, their latest voucher scheme to be adopted by Alabama that will funnel public school dollars into private pockets. Hundreds of millions of education funding will be spent subsidizing the choice of private and homeschooling for some families through education savings accounts, or ESAs. While the Education Trust Fund did not grow enough to cut the grocery tax another cent to help poor and working folks here in the state, legislators determined it grew enough to fund the CHOOSE Act. With public schools at the center of raging culture wars and the political push for school choice escalating since the pandemic, the Republican leadership in Montgomery decided to ram through this additional layer of school privatization regardless of public input. And sadly, the defenders of public education were not strong enough to stop it. Thank you to Alabama Rise for speaking up for public schools even when it wasn't necessarily popular among some groups in Montgomery. A statewide nonprofit coalition fighting poverty at the public policy level, Arise was the only group to testify in opposition during the committee hearing. And thank you to the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, whose national president, Randy Weingarten, held a press conference in opposition in Birmingham. I hope that public school educators and allies will remember who fought the good fight. This push for school choice is about putting public money into private pockets while pushing reactionary, segregationist ideology, all the while preying on dissatisfaction with the public schools that are sabotaged by these same forces. Most of it is financed by a handful of billionaires. And the results of these experiments are unsurprisingly harmful for students, educators, families, and communities. School choice is not about what's best for the kids or the public. We have to acknowledge that public schools have their challenges, their flaws, and their inequities. We know there are legitimate problems to be solved. But the solutions won't come from the very same corporate and reactionary forces who've played a major role in causing these problems. We're asked to believe that introducing more profiteering off our children will somehow result in less corruption and better quality, but the evidence, of course, says otherwise. The alternative is that we demand great public schools for every child and every family in every community. It's not just about your family or my family. It's about the public as a whole. If our state were serious about public education for all its children, educators would be empowered to create the kinds of public schools our communities deserve. Ultimately, to win justice for their students, educators have to have a seat at the table because their working conditions are the students' learning conditions. And that is why public school employees deserve the same legal rights as other workers in the private sector. Not just the right to a union, but also the right to collective bargaining, the right to representation, and the right to collectively withhold their labor. When educators organize in their workplaces to build power on the job, when educators organize in their communities to build strong coalitions, when educators organize at the ballot box to elect pro-education candidates, then we can begin to achieve the public schools Alabama's students deserve. From parental leave to child care, universal school meals to universal pre-K, class size limits to after-school programs, there's so much more progress to be made. And only when we come together and fight for it will it happen. Educators, parents, students, and communities must unite to defend the teaching profession, the resources our schools rely on, and ultimately the very concept of public education.
Yep. So there we go. Much like last week in Southern Labor, we like to take a look at what bosses were up to in the last week because not enough attention gets paid to when bosses break the law. They can steal from you. They can sexually harass you. They can be responsible for your death, and all that they will face is a small fine. But we wanted to, at the least, inform you of the consequences that they do face when these investigations are held and when they come to a conclusion. So with that, let's get into Boss Watch and see what bosses were up to from March the 8th to the 15th. In Missouri, a Park Hills vegetable farming and packing operation will pay about $480,000 in back wages to 200 workers, following an investigation by the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. Stealing $500,000 from 200 people. That's the kind of stuff, right, that if it were you or I doing that, I go into a rich person's house and I steal $500,000 in jewelry, I go under the jail, right? But if you're a boss and you steal from 200 working people, just pay it back. Just pay it back. Take your time. You can do installments. Just pay it back. Not a big deal. In a consent order and judgment entered in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri on March the 12th, and an H-2A settlement agreement executed on December 29th, 2023, Missouri Vegetable Farm LLC and its owners Benji Proffer and Robert Proffer will pay back wages of almost $400,000 to 100 H-2A temporary visa workers and 105 U.S. workers, as well as H-2A back wages of $85,000 to 22 corresponding U.S. workers. The company was also assessed civil money penalties of $38,000 for its H-2A violations. The action follows an investigation by the department's Wage and Hour Division that found Missouri Vegetable Farm often failed to compensate workers at time and a half the adverse effect wage rate for the specific agricultural task being performed when they worked over 40 hours in a work week. The company also failed to combine hours employees worked in both farming and packaging operations and to pay the required wage rate. The investigation reviewed pay records from May the 1st, 2021 through December the 15th, 2021. Wow. This is just for 6 months of activity. That is bizarre. That's crazy talk. The H-2A Temporary Agricultural Program allows agricultural employers to bring non-immigrant farm workers to the United States to perform agricultural labor or services of a temporary or seasonal nature. Employers must understand the wage requirements for the workers they employ. When seeking approval to hire temporary visa workers, employers agree to specific terms for pay rates, job tasks, and other compensation, and must also pay non-visa employees at least the same rate, said Wage and Hour Division District Director Noah Lee in St. Louis. The wages recovered for these workers will have a significant impact on their lives. Many of them may not have understood their rights to overtime pay, which is obvious, right? You have an immigrant worker, they don't know the labor laws in, a lot of native workers don't understand the labor laws in this country, much less immigrant workers. And so it's all the more important that we have government agencies like the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division to enforce the law. In Georgia, the U.S. Department of Labor has cited an Atlanta chemical manufacturer with a staggering 67 violations and a proposed penalty of almost $300,000 for exposing workers to a series of workplace dangers associated with chemicals and struck-by hazards. The department's Occupational and Safety and Health Administration cited Southern Industrial Chemicals, operating as SIC Technologies, after conducting a safety and health inspection. Across both, OSHA found violations for failing to provide feasible engineering controls to reduce employee exposures to hexavalent chromium, establish and implement a respiratory protection program, and provide a medical evaluation before workers were fit tested or required to use respirators. They failed to develop and implement a comprehensive hazard communication program for handling and use of hazardous chemicals, and a lot more. There's like a dozen more of these violations. Quote, Southern Industrial Chemicals failed to make employee safety and health a priority. Chemical exposures can lead to incurable and life-altering conditions, so it's vital that employers take immediate steps to recognize and mitigate life-threatening hazards like those found in this investigation, said OSHA Atlanta West Area Office Director Jeffrey Stowowie. Employers must evaluate and effectively control respiratory hazards in the workplace and establish communication programs that meet or exceed federal safety standards to protect workers. Our hazard communication overview provides employers with the knowledge to get this done and make their workplaces safer for all. Workers in the U.S. suffered more than 190,000 illnesses and approximately 50,000 deaths annually related to chemical exposures. OSHA's website provides an overview of chemical hazards and toxic substances to provide employers and employees with tips to recognize hazards and control exposures. In South Carolina, Walmart will pay $70,000 and furnish other relief to settle a disability discrimination lawsuit filed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC charged that Walmart violated the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, when it revoked permission from an employee with a disability to use a store electric cart as a reasonable accommodation for a disability, forcing him to take unpaid leave. According to the EEOC's lawsuit, shortly after hiring Luis Quinones, who uses a prosthetic leg, Walmart accommodated Quinones by permitting him to use one of the store's electric carts to perform some of his job duties. Approximately 7 months later, Walmart told Quinones he was no longer able to use the cart, claiming that the store's electric carts were for customers only, even though other employees were permitted to use the carts to accommodate temporary injuries. The suit alleged that Walmart failed to offer an alternative, reasonable accommodation that would have allowed Quinones to continue working, and instead Walmart placed him on indefinite unpaid leave. Such alleged conduct violated Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, which protects individuals with disabilities from workplace discrimination and requires that employers provide reasonable workplace accommodations. In addition to paying monetary damages, Walmart also agreed to offer Quinones a job at one of its South Carolina locations. The 2-year consent decree settling the suit enjoins the company from failing to provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities relating to walking and standing at store number 0514 in Aiken. The decree also, with limited exceptions, enjoins Walmart from eliminating existing reasonable accommodations for such individuals without identifying an alternative that allows the employee to remain in their position, except in certain circumstances. Walmart will be required to conduct an annual training for salaried employees at the affected store, post an employee notice, and submit periodic compliance reports to the EEOC. That is about it for us today. Adam, you had a couple of plugs that you wanted to get to, is that right?
Yeah, I do. And, there were a couple of news stories we didn't get to today. There's a lot of news coming out of Prattville with the library situation going on, so keep your eyes on that. Alabama Reflector has a couple good articles out on that situation. They also had a good article out about working class people representation in state legislatures. And you won't be shocked to learn that there aren't many working people in state legislatures, including here in Alabama. Also, there's continues to be more deaths in Alabama's prisons. We've heard some rumors about some prison organizing that's happening. But we're not really sure what all's going on there. So if anyone does have some intel that they're willing to share about what's happening inside the prisons in terms of organizing, do let us know. In terms of some plugs, of course, as always, labornotes.org/events. Check that out. They have great online training. We're definitely looking forward to the Labor Notes Conference next month. On March 26th, I am working through the North Alabama Labor Council with our friend Jennifer Shearer at the Economic Policy Institute to do a Unions 101 webinar. So March 26th, 6 p.m. Central Time. Definitely check that out. It is for anyone who is remotely interested in unions. If you're a progressive ally, if you're a union member already, if you are a curious worker, whatever the situation may be, if you just want to learn a little bit more about unions, why they're important, why they're a big deal, why we talk about them, how they can impact your life, what they do in terms of the economy and the society, all that good stuff. It'll be a great event, so check that out. You can go to the North Alabama Area Labor Council's Facebook page. There's an event there. We'll also be sending it out to our TVLR list later this week.
Will we be able to upload that to the channel, you think?
Let me find out. Yeah, that's I would love to record it. And so if that's something we could upload, that would be great.
Yeah, I think we should.
And then last plugs would be Alabama Arise is hosting its annual legislative day on April 2nd. Go to alarise.org to learn more about that. It's a great opportunity to lobby legislators in person and speak up for working people. And the very next day, on April 3rd, Alabama AFL-CIO hosts its Roadkill Barbecue in Montgomery. So lots of opportunities to get involved over the next few weeks. Definitely take advantage of it.
Yep. So like I said, that's going to be it for us today, folks. We have a great overtime lined up today. We're going to be talking to McKenna Schueler, staff reporter for Orlando Weekly, about what's been going on in Florida. taking
a lot, apparently.
Yeah, a lot. Debriefing the legislative session with our favorite Florida reporter. We are also going to be talking about Jimmy Kimmel's speech at the Oscars, playing some clips from the 32-hour work week hearing last week. Labor for Ceasefire had a webinar. We're going to be playing some clips from that. We're going to be talking about free speech in Israel-Palestine, how Shapiro wants you to work until you die, all that and more in overtime. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857 is where you will call in if you want to be a part of the show. With that, and Facebook and YouTube is where you're going to find Overtime. Or if you're on listening to us on WMMT in Whitesburg, Kentucky, just wait a couple of days and you'll be able to hear Overtime right here on the radio. So, see you in a little bit, folks. Okay, all right. I think we're off the radio now. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. Like I said, really great Overtime lined up. It's going to be exciting. Love talking to McKenna. She is awesome. The reporter for Florida, for sure. And probably, I think she is the closest thing we have to a full-time labor reporter in the entire southeastern United States, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I say closest thing to a full-time labor reporter when I don't mean to say she would not qualify as a labor reporter. I mean because she obviously does. She does great labor reporting, but she also has to report on other stuff, which is bonkers. So she's got a full job, full load on her plate, and we're going to be talking to her about all of it. So yeah, going to take a break and be right back, and we'll be talking to McKenna Schueler.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
folks. Welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio program and the labor radio program in the southern United States. That's right, folks. We are on 4 radio stations in 3 states, and now the second half of the program, Overtime, is also on the radio, WMMT 88.7 FM in Whitesburg, Kentucky. We appreciate partnering with them. If you're listening to us as a podcast, give us a 5-star rating. If you're listening to us on YouTube, like the stream or the video as it comes up. Subscribe to the channel, donate to the program, tvlr.fm/donate. You can pre-order our logo cap, tvlr.fm/store. We're going to be closing pre-orders this week, so get your orders in.
Yes, and I really appreciate all of you who've already ordered. I appreciate all of you who like and subscribe and share and do all that good stuff. We have some great fans, and y'all do a lot to get the word out. We really appreciate it.
Yep.
We just got to keep getting this message out. You know, more people need to hear messages of solidarity and working class organizing. It's important, especially down here in the South. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Speaking of WMMT, their spring fundraising drive is coming up. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that because we appreciate being on the radio there, and we appreciate having a radio station like that because, you know, radio is just a toxic cesspool of corporate banality, you know? Corporate banality in the, in the examples of like top 40 stations or country stations, right? Just boring corporate kind of, pop media, right? Or right-wing trash, right? That is basically all you hear on the radio. There are virtually zero progressive, even liberal, much less socialist radio stations, union radio stations, and WMMT in Whitesburg, Kentucky is one of the few that exist, one of the few community-owned radio stations that have progressive, left-wing programming in addition to local community art and music and support for the community. WMMT is really a unique thing that folks who are listening to me in Whitesburg, Kentucky, you should feel lucky that you have WMMT, and you should support it if you haven't. You can go to wmmt.org/donate to support their fundraising drive, even if you don't live in Kentucky and you want to send them a couple of bucks as a thank you for letting us put, union propaganda on their airwaves. We appreciate that. I'm definitely going to send them at least a couple of bucks, a few dollars, as a token of appreciation, because I do appreciate it, and they do it for free, right? We're on 2 commercial radio stations and 2 community radio stations. The community radio stations, we are on for free. The commercial radio stations, we have to pay hundreds of dollars a month to be on their station, and WMMT, because they value the stuff that we put out and they think that folks should hear it, they put it on their programming for free. And so we appreciate that, and I will be making a donation. If you have a couple of dollars to give, then I encourage you to do that as well, wmmt.org/donate. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff in overtime. Like I said, we're going to be talking about what happened in Florida last week. The legislative session ended. I'm going to get the top 5 bills from the legislative session. They were all bad, is my understanding. I'm going to be talking about a 32-hour work week, labor for ceasefire, and free speech, and Ben Shapiro wanting you to work till you're dead. Let's start with the Oscars, where I didn't watch the Oscars. I don't care about the Oscars. I don't watch movies really. Although I have heard a lot of the hype around Dune 2, and I want to see that in theaters before it leaves. But Other than that, you know, I watch a movie like 2 or 3 times a year, right? I'm not a big movie guy, but the Oscars are a big cultural phenomenon, and Jimmy Kimmel ended his speech with a rare recognition of the working people that make Hollywood possible, and an homage to the solidarity that was shown in and between actors and other working people during the SAG-AFTRA strike. And it was a really beautiful moment, I thought. And I, as a union member, as a working person, appreciated that from Jimmy Kimmel. And so I wanted to share it with everybody here. Let's play that clip.
And now that the strike is over, now that Fran Drescher has returned to her volunteer work, reading loudly to the hearing impaired, we can be proud of the fact that this long and difficult work stoppage taught us that this very strange town of ours, as pretentious and superficial as it can be, at its heart is a union town. It's not just a bunch of heavily Botoxed, Hailey Bieber smoothie drinking, diabetes prescription abusing, gluten sensitive Nepo babies with perpetually shivering chihuahuas. This is a coalition of strong, hardworking, mentally tough American laborers, women and men who would 100% for sure die if we even had to touch the handle of a shovel. But the reason we were able to make a deal is because of the people who rallied beside us. So before we celebrate ourselves, let's have a very well-deserved round of applause for the people who work behind the scenes, the Teamsters, the truck drivers, the lighting crew, sound, camera, gaffers, grips. That's right. All the people who refuse to cross the picket lines, there they are. If you're wearing Skechers to the Oscars, take a bow. Come on, guys, take a bow. Take a bow. You deserve it. Thank you for standing with us. And also, we want you to know that in your upcoming negotiation, we will stand with you, too. And also, I'm going to make sure this show goes really long tonight so you get a ton of overtime. And
so there you go. That was great. I enjoyed watching that. Really great to see, you know, working people get the recognition that they deserve. One of my favorite quotes from Proudhon, the anarchist philosopher, who I later learned was apparently kind of anti-union, which is, not great, but nevertheless, he has a quote in one of his books about how basically kind of arguing for, a much more equal distribution of resources, and even, making the kind of devil's advocate case, as I understood it, for totally equal compensation for everybody doing everything, which I don't think would, make the most sense in terms of incentives, but just on a deserts level. Like, do you deserve the same? He was talking about how there's people say that, if you are a genius, then you deserve more, right? If you produce more, then you deserve more. If you, are some sort of genius, right, then you should be compensated more. And he makes the point that people who are geniuses can, exactly like Jimmy Kimmel said, the Proudhon to Jimmy Kimmel pipeline. Exactly like Jimmy Kimmel said, the people who do the acting and who are like geniuses at their craft, at their art, people who, when you watch a movie, you literally feel like you are in the room with them, right? Geniuses at their craft, they can only do that in a society where somebody else is driving the truck across the country, where somebody else is making sure the lighting is exactly right, where somebody else is picking the fruits. And so the quote is, the glory of genius can only come about in the bosom of a great civilization, right? And so, do actually geniuses deserve more than the truck drivers or anybody else? Because they're completely and totally dependent on the other people doing this stuff to make it possible for them to share their genius, to be able to indulge in that geniusness, right? And so seeing that kind of recognition on the stage was great. I loved it. I love seeing it. They deserve all that recognition and more. And we're going to be talking about those contract negotiations that are coming up. Some of the working crafts have already come to a tentative agreement, is my understanding. But IATSE is going to be beginning their negotiations soon, and the Teamsters are in the middle of negotiations. I'm not sure, but
I believe IATSE's already started as well.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to be we want to talk to somebody from IATSE about those negotiations here soon. So if you're in IATSE and you're affected by these Hollywood negotiations, reach out to us. We would love to talk to you or somebody else about them. And same for the Teamsters. We want to know more about what y'all do and what y'all are asking for in these contract negotiations, and it's great to see a commitment from SAG-AFTRA to support y'all in the event that y'all need to go on strike.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to see the crew behind the scenes getting some love. Always appreciate that.
Yep.
So, yeah, appreciate Jimmy Kimmel for doing that.
Florida just ended its legislative session. Alabama is halfway through. It's halfway through. So we've got another full half of our legislative session to go.
Yes, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. But fortunately for Florida, theirs is over. So the damage for this year is done, and now we're going to assess it. And to help us assess the damage done to Floridians, we have McKenna Schueler, staff reporter for the Orlando Weekly. She's on the line right now, right?
She is, yes.
McKenna, welcome to the program. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me back.
It's great to have you. You do great work, and like I said this on Twitter, but I am not aware of a single other full-time reporter that does as much work in the labor space as you do, reporting on the activities of working people and specifically making pains to point out how legislation will affect working people, even where it's, politics, and other reporters might just kind of focus on the politics and the horse race stuff. You really do a lot to connect things that you're reporting on to the lives of working people and how it affects them. And I appreciate that. I really appreciate that a lot. And, working people in the South deserve a lot more reporters like you. And so I just wanted to say that at the top. And to let you go on, to let you tell us what were the, like I said, the legislative session just ended. So what are the big takeaways? Give us kind of the big overview, and then we can go into a couple of the bills individually.
Yeah, so I kind of tried to focus on some of the big labor-related legislation that did pass this session just because of the audience and such. So broadly speaking, I think there was a pretty eclectic slate of anti-labor bills this session. Last year, there was a sweeping bill targeting organized labor, specifically public sector unions, whereas this year, bills filed didn't just target organized labor, but also children, specifically minors 16 and older, as well as outdoor workers and working people in Florida who benefit from prevailing wage laws and other local laws known as living wage ordinances. So I feel like that'd be a great place to start if you're interested in that.
Yeah, let's start with the living wage ordinances. I actually, that's not one I was tracking. I was tracking the union bill, the one dealing with the public sector stuff. I was tracking the child labor laws and the outdoor heat and stuff like that. But I wasn't tracking anything affecting living wage ordinances. And so presumably the Florida legislature, because they value autonomy and home rule and they value working people, they in fact, definitely allowed municipalities to set their own living wage ordinances and raise the minimum wage in Florida. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so so this is like something that has been pushed by the industry lobbyists for years, but that was the living wage ordinance preemption that was actually packaged into the bill with the preemption of the workplace heat standards. So what kind of happened there? That's House Bill 433, sponsored by Republican state representative, a first-term State Rep Tiffany Esposito, who is herself the president of a regional chamber of commerce. So that bill started out as the preemption bill to prevent city and county governments from establishing any kind of mandates on workplace heat exposure protections for outdoor workers like construction workers, farm workers. So it would ban anything that's stronger than what's already required under state or federal law, which isn't really much beyond some guidelines. And this bill was a direct attack on a local push in Miami-Dade County in South Florida, which was pushing for just that kind of policy, just really basic stuff like requiring shaded water breaks, providing instruction on heat illness prevention. Honestly, nothing super radical because it had to get watered down enough for local elected leaders to actually get on board. And that's because there was a lot of pressure from the industry side to trash it, and industry groups did actually end up managing to delay a vote on that, something like a week before this statewide bill was filed. No other city or county has done that, so this was entirely preemptive, not gutting any policies in any local communities that already exist, because unfortunately they don't. And I don't think that was necessarily clarified in some of the national coverage, but obviously this just kind of prevents local governments from even trying.
Right.
But then what happened is that the bill's sponsor changed the legislation to make it a lot broader. And so in the end, what actually passed through a lot of amendments and chaos, especially in the last couple weeks of session, was that heat safety preemption, but also it would eliminate about a dozen local laws in places like Miami, known as living wage ordinances, that require companies profiting off government contracts to pay their workers something closer to a living wage in their communities. So Miami-Dade, I think, has one of the highest living wage requirements, like a minimum $18 or something. And this affects contracted workers at airports, janitorial and security employees. But it's honestly unclear how many workers it will affect because the bill's sponsor herself did not know. But it's expected to be probably like tens of thousands, just based on what we know of, especially those ordinances covering South Florida. And the bill was also changed last minute to preempt predictive scheduling. So basically to prevent any communities from fighting for fair work week laws, which actually isn't really a thing in Florida yet. And what these laws do in other communities across the country that have implemented them is just require employers to provide hourly workers, some of whom are working multiple jobs, to have their schedules a week or two in advance so they can essentially plan the rest of their lives and don't get called on to work the night before when they have kids to take care of or doctor's appointments, stuff like that. And as I mentioned, like this is something that has been pushed before, not specifically the heat exposure stuff, but the living wage ordinance preemption. And I think one compromise that really secured its passage specifically on the Senate side is that the wage and scheduling preemption, that specifically won't go into effect until September 30th, 2026, which is the exact date that Florida's $15 minimum wage is going to be fully effective as well, which is, that's under a ballot initiative that was passed by voters in 2020. So that's kind of like the broad strokes of that bill. Again, kind of like the sort of still a smaller, narrower version of the what was called the Death Star preemption bill that was passed in Texas last year. But one thing I've really been trying to keep an eye on throughout session on this bill and other bills is just where this legislation came from. And specifically with this bill, it's important to note that the Chamber of Commerce and other business lobbying groups have been really trying to do this for at least a couple of decades, similar to the anti-union bill passed last year. But this year's preemption, which really just kind of restricts the local governments, really kind of builds on a similar law passed in the early 2000s, I think, which did the same thing as far as forbidding the state or local governments from regulating at all the wages or benefits that private employers provide. And the exception there was private employers that contract with local governments, so government contractors. And that's exactly what this year's bill targeted. So essentially bosses that receive public taxpayer dollars that don't want to have to be forced to pay above Florida's minimum wage.
And
doesn't mean.
Yeah, well, and
Sorry.
you mentioned the state minimum wage that passed as a ballot initiative. Did you say that they passed that this law also overturned that?
No, it doesn't. It's just I honestly don't know the reason behind it, but like the wage and scheduling preemption, it will go fully into effect on the same exact day that Florida is supposed to get its $15 minimum wage because
Okay, gotcha.
yeah, the 2020 ballot initiative, it kind of created a gradual process. So the minimum wage at that time was like $8.46 an hour. Then it rose to $10, and it's been rising 1 year, $1 each since. So currently it's at $12, and it'll reach 15 by September 30th, 2026.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, not good. And so, what were the?
Also very familiar to
Yes.
Alabama. We've
Yeah.
dealt with preemption as well. So yeah, it's unfortunate how this spreads from place to place.
How did they respond to arguments about how it might be worth having some sort of heat protections in Florida for working people? How did they respond to challenges to the bill?
I mean, supporters, which it was again kind of passed along party lines, I believe. There were some Republicans who ended up voting against it, particularly in South Florida, where it was going to be, it was just a major issue. But supporters pretty much just kind of pointed to like, oh, OSHA has guidelines, they have restrictions. Employers can already be fined for, not taking care of their employees. And then the industry was arguing that lawmakers were essentially trying to signal that they weren't already taking care of their employees, so they felt kind of insulted, or at least that's how they presented themselves. So the trouble is enforcement in Florida with OSHA and with even the wage and hour stuff. There's very limited capacity to actually reach work sites. And I think the Miami Herald, for instance, reported that since 2020, there have been 5 Florida employers that have been fined by OSHA. Wow. And that was after workers died. So the fact that it has to kind of get to that point for employers to face any kind of consequence is something that was really troubling, understandably, for labor rights organizations, immigrant rights groups, because a lot of immigrants make up these workforces that are working outside. So that was very concerning and a big push for why they wanted to at least tried to do this in Miami-Dade.
Right. That's bad. Hopefully we're gonna get some good news here in just a second. Child labor, we've got good news there, right? The bill about child labor, they were protecting children more strongly. Is that what happened?
I would say that probably some people would argue that the legislation is it's definitely more protective from where it started, because it was significantly watered down because of all the public opposition that there was. But I guess one thing that was just, so there were 2 child labor related bills, 2 bills specifically amending what is literally under Florida statutes as child labor statutes. But one thing that I kind of found frustrating throughout this whole experience was that most of the media coverage has focused on one of the bills, House Bill 49, which was admittedly like just a more direct attack on child labor law, because that's pretty much all it did. Whereas the other bill, Senate Bill 460 or House Bill 917, which is what passed, that bill broadly concerns career and technical education programs in schools, but also just contains a small section that relaxes restrictions on the kinds of work that 16 and 17-year-olds can do on residential construction sites, directly affecting hazardous work restrictions under Florida's child labor statutes. So
that's slippery. Put it in the career tech bill.
Yeah, and it was, I think what's kind of scary, or I don't know if I should say that, but about that bill is that I think if there were a couple people like myself and Jason Garcia, who's an investigative reporter also based in Orlando, who has a newsletter, Seeking Rents. It's a Substack. We were a couple of the handful of reporters who kind of first caught it, but I think it would have been really easy to miss that because the fact that it was packaged into this broader bill, that bill actually ended up getting quite a bit of bipartisan support. So like on the Senate side, for instance, it was ultimately passed unanimously by both Republicans and Democrats. But
so what were the restrictions that were lifted on 16 and 17-year-olds in residential construction? What were the jobs that they could not do before that they can do now?
So minors under 18 were specifically barred from just working on construction sites broadly, unless it was like sales or office jobs, or there's an exemption under child labor law in both state and federal law, I believe, for students who are employed in or not employed, but who are in student learner programs through like a school or apprenticeship programs. So there is a carve out there, but currently under law, since this new bill hasn't been signed into law yet, teenagers are barred from working most construction jobs, but this specifically kind of let 16 and 17-year-olds now work on residential construction sites. But it was watered down pretty significantly from where it started, to the point where that's when the media really started ignoring it again. And it made it clear that teens, for instance, would not be allowed to work on roofs because under the bill as it was filed, it would have allowed teens 16 and older to work in commercial construction as well as residential. It also would have allowed them to work on superstructures, roofs, ladders, and scaffolding more than 6 feet off the ground, which is currently barred under state and federal law with those limited exceptions again. And there were some, quote unquote, guardrails added to the legislation, ostensibly to protect minors on the job. But there were there were definitely a few folks who work in the trades, some organized with the AFL-CIO's Working Families Lobby Corps, that said that these weren't enough to protect kids from health and safety risks on the job. And then I also did some reporting just on the lack of enforcement in the state in general when it comes to child labor law. So the state of Florida itself just has 7 employees dedicated to enforcing child labor law. And then there's the federal government, which also has pretty limited capacity for a state where there are, I think, an estimated like tens of thousands of teens in the workforce. And even on that side too, Florida also lacks the state labor department, which was abolished under then Governor Jeb Bush in the early 2000s. And one of the things that department did was combat wage theft. And we haven't really gotten a good replacement for that. And we know that construction is an industry that sees one of the highest rates of not only child labor violations, but also wage theft.
Right. That's exactly right.
Right. What about HB 49? Did that one pass as well? And what was in that?
Yeah, so that bill was passed mostly along party lines. So all Democrats were against it, and I think there was one Republican in the Florida House who opposed it. But that bill is the one that got the most attention. It was filed first, and that bill allows parents to sign a consent form and give permission for their 16 or 17-year-old child to work more than 30 hours per week during the school year. It also allows minors 16 and up to work more than 8 hours a day on holidays and Sundays during the school year, and adds a carve out from restrictions on hours for minors 16 and older who are homeschooled or enrolled in a virtual education program. And House Bill 49 was significantly watered down as well. And specifically where that started. So House Bill 49 would have kind of gutted restrictions, work and hour restrictions pretty broadly for 16 and 17-year-olds to essentially treat them as adult workers. And currently under law, minors aren't allowed to work over 30 hours per week during the school year, and there are stricter regulations for kids under 16. And then there was also an effort to preempt local governments from passing anything that's more restrictive in their communities. So it was kind of like stripped down ultimately, due to, again, a lot of public feedback. And there was a lot of media attention, again, on where that bill came from, because both of these child labor bills should be always emphasized, in my opinion, is just kind of like who's working on these things behind the scenes. So HB 49 came from the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is a Florida-based think tank that's historically lobbied for laws designed to undermine anti-poverty programs like SNAP and Medicaid, and also make it harder to obtain unemployment assistance. They support defunding public education and have lobbied in favor of anti-union legislation. But the Washington Post reported last April, I believe, that the FGA was a driving force behind child labor rollbacks in a number of states. So seeing that they're based in Florida, it honestly made a lot of sense for that kind of push to come here. Then the other bill, Senate Bill 460, that was a collaboration between the Florida Home Builders Association and the Associated Builders and Contractors of Florida, all according to public records I got. So email communications, in some cases text messages that were obtained through a public records request. And those two industry groups for the construction bill, those are two pretty major lobbying forces representing thousands of construction companies, home builders across the state. They're also state affiliates of national organizations that have supported child labor rollbacks in other states as well, according to some tracking from the Economic Policy Institute. So again, that wasn't really surprising either, although all parties involved there really tried to downplay the child labor stuff throughout the whole session.
Right. What were some of those? What was the communications that I noticed that you put on Twitter? Was that associated with this child labor bill?
So I got public records for quite a bit of legislation, but for both of those bills, yeah, I did get emails and text messages specifically for HB 49. Those were kind of interesting, but yeah, so there's a paper trail, and that's been kind of nice to be able to provide in our reporting, literally just kind of screenshots of these emails. And I'm happy to also kind of share those public records with anybody who wants them, because again, these are public, so you can request them, and there was no cost associated with it. So I think it's just that's not always the case. Sometimes agencies, state and local governments will try to pretty much provide these records at a cost that is unaffordable, especially for newsrooms, or I shouldn't say especially for newsrooms, but definitely local ones, but especially for like individuals, if you're not even associated with the media. But yeah, I did put on Twitter some of these screenshots about the emails that I received regarding.
I just want to say I really appreciate you, uncovering stuff like that and really, making clear where this is coming from, because I do think that's important. It's worth us knowing who is pushing these bills, right? Yeah. Because it's not just like some legislator cooked this up, in their own imagination. I mean, occasionally I'm sure that happens, but there are clear special interests that are working to push clear agendas.
Right. So last year there was a law passed affecting public sector unions in the state of Florida. Can you give us a recap of what that law did, what its effects have been this year, and the new and updated bill that passed that's going to be amending the one that passed last year?
Right, yeah. So the union legislation, there was some legislation that was filed this year that is essentially a follow-up to last year's really sweeping anti-union law, which the big things that did, that prohibited most public employees from having, or public sector union members, I should say, from having union dues automatically deducted from their paychecks. and established a minimum 60% threshold for most public sector unions. So, and I say most because the legislation largely exempted unions representing sworn law enforcement officers, firefighters, correctional, and probation officers, which generally endorse and support Republicans for elected office, throw campaign cash at them, all that stuff.
Right.
So under the new law, at least 60% of workers in those non-exempted unions that the union represents must also be dues-paying members. So at the same time that you're requiring more workers to pay union dues, you're also making it more difficult for them to do it. And I know a lot of union leaders, especially teachers unions, have been pretty open about just the challenge there, specifically them losing members just because they had to figure out a new way for people to pay dues in a way that was fast enough to be able to transition people over and to find a method that members actually felt comfortable with too, as far as the financial security, those kinds of maintaining privacy, that kind of stuff. And so the effects of that bill, for months, there wasn't a lot to kind of report as far as the effects, because there was a pretty sweeping, there was a pretty long rulemaking process just to kind of figure out how to implement it. But what essentially happened, so under the new law, if a union doesn't have at least 60% membership, they have a couple of things can happen. So one, they can petition for a recertification election, and during that time, the contract, if they have one, is still in place and the bargaining unit is still intact. They have to do that within 30 days of getting a notice from the state that, oh, hey, you're at risk for decertification because we saw that you have less than 60% membership. But the other thing that can happen, which I really didn't learn about until kind of within the past few months, or I hadn't really thought it could happen or would happen, is that a union can also, if they submit their annual registration renewal paperwork showing that they have less than 60% membership and they don't repetition or petition for recertification, they can also just be decertified. So petitioning for an election requires signatures from at least 30% of workers, and getting that 30% can be a challenge for some units with some barriers, including units that have like literally tens of thousands of employees, or units where membership was already like pretty dismally low. And then a union must, again, petition for recertification within 30 days of receiving that notice from the state. So unfortunately, what I saw and learned was that this was considered too great a challenge for over 40 bargaining units and counting that have since been decertified. So they either tried to petition to gather those petitions and were unsuccessful, or in some cases, it appears that they didn't try at all, which is really devastating and was kind of difficult to report, honestly. And most of these bargaining units decertified so far without any sort of election are AFSCME units, representing blue collar workers for cities and counties, as well as blue and white collar workers at public universities, so including some of the biggest in the state. The teachers unions have been fighting this pretty hard. They were already required under state law passed in 2018 to maintain at least 50% membership. And that was specifically aimed at those K through 12 education unions. So they were a little bit more prepared to survive this new membership requirement because nobody else had any sort of threshold before that in the public sector.
Right.
So that's kind of like the effects of that so far. And I'm still kind of keeping tabs on the decertifications that are still coming in, because I first reported on the kind of first major purge of that early February, but then last month there were also, I think, 3 more decertifications at least. So it's still happening, and it's going to keep happening, imagine. But then there are also a lot of unions that have petitioned for recertification, particularly those teacher unions that didn't reach the 60%.
So one of the bad things about this is that automatically, once you're decertified, your contract is null. And something that Chris Townsend asked last time he was on was, are any of the counselors of these municipalities, where, a lot of these municipalities are controlled by Democrats, are any of the municipalities where units are being decertified, are they any of them making commitments to maintain to continue to adhere to the contract?
I haven't seen anything about that. I think that's a really interesting idea and a really interesting proposal. One thing I did find when I was doing my reporting was there was a school district kind of near the Daytona Beach area where one of their AFSCME units, or their only AFSCME unit, I should say, was decertified. And when I reached out to them to ask about that, kind of like that issue, like, are you going to still honor the contract? Because I think it was still workers there had a contract that was supposed to last either through, I think it was supposed to expire later this year. And they said that they would continue to honor the terms of the contract at least through the end of that. And then they confirmed that after that, that's it. But there was one local university, the University of Central Florida, and I posed to them the same question, and they said no. They're just like, so you don't have this contract anymore. They sent an email to all their employees, pretty much kind of laying it all out, like, hey, so the union's been decertified and you had this contract and now you don't. And that was kind of it, which was honestly kind of shocking to see. But I haven't seen anything as far as from like local government leaders, although I think I haven't seen that kind of locally yet because there haven't been any local government unions that have been decertified, although there are a couple at risk. I think some LIUNA units have sort of gotten those initial warnings from the state regulating agency, PERC, which is the Public Employees Relations Commission. So I'm keeping an eye on that, but I haven't seen any elsewhere. I think there were some city workers in Jacksonville, more in like North, and also some places in South Florida that their units were decertified.
Right. And so what did the bill updating this law do?
Yeah, so that brings us back to this year's legislation. It definitely didn't get a lot of media attention just because it wasn't as sweeping. It was more focused on fixing some technical and procedural issues that came up from the implementation and rulemaking process of last year's bill. That's probably the most generous way to describe it. It's like fixing the confusion around things that the bill sponsors apparently didn't catch last year. So another way to describe it, based on conversations I've had and public records I've pulled on that legislation as well, is that the bill is designed largely to address complaints from the fire and police unions that were supposed to be exempted from most of the new regulations. So what happened there is, like, during the rulemaking process last year, there was some confusion about which bargaining units were actually exempted, because there are some units that, for instance, contained paramedics in addition to firefighters or EMTs and such in the police bargaining units. So even the state regulating agency, PERC, which is led by DeSantis appointees, they were like, well, I don't think you're exempted after all. You're going to have to follow the new rules like everybody else. And
wow.
That got the cop and firefighter unions fired up, and they were lobbying the bill sponsors from last year, who also sponsored this year's legislation. Neither of whom, they haven't been union members ever themselves, but they were lobbied to make some changes. So emails I got through a records request also show that a couple of out-of-state anti-union think tanks, so the Freedom Foundation based in Washington and the Mackinac Center based in Michigan, were also collaborating on some requests around this, and they sent draft legislation essentially to accomplish what did get passed this year, as well as some, honestly, a really interesting and extensive list of legislative priorities that didn't make it into the legislation this year at all at any point. So that's something I'm going to be definitely keeping an eye on in future sessions. But also I'm curious to see if they're going to pop up in other state legislatures, since these are think tanks that do kind of just like send this draft language to state legislators in different parts of the country, not just Florida, similar to like the FGA with the child labor bill and stuff. But
yeah, I'm
but
curious how many they've sent to Alabama. I'm sure they've sent some stuff down here. So yeah, that would be interesting to find out.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, if anybody sees some of these kind of public sector union laws popping up in different state legislatures, if you want to give me a shout out, and I will like look into that, because there are definitely some things that again like didn't make it into this year's law in Florida that could very well, it's possible they're being pitched elsewhere. So I think already I saw in Louisiana there's a new pretty sweeping anti-union law targeting public sector unions that included some language that honestly seemed pretty similar to what I saw when I got those public records. So for instance, one thing this new bill in Louisiana, I think, is trying to do is to restrict certain activities that unions can engage in. And I was kind of comparing like the language there to what I got from the Freedom Foundation, the Mackinac Center, through that records request. And there was a lot of like similar things popping up. So it was kind of a similar proposal there. So
Right.
if anybody sees anything and wants to know if and wants to see those public records, just like let me know, and I will, do what I can to try and kind of help you sort of compare, I guess, or see if maybe there could be some of these groups behind that. But
I think that probably here in Alabama, we're not going to see much of that because, unfortunately, we already don't have any collective bargaining system set up in the state of Alabama. So, and dues deductions have already been taken away from all unions except teachers, firefighters, and cops. Is that right, Adam? Do teachers still have dues deductions?
Teachers do have dues deductions, but there were restrictions similar to what you mentioned. There were restrictions placed on the activities that they could do, what they called political activity. And so that was tied up in court for years on what exactly that meant. The AEA had to do bank draft and credit card draft for like a couple years. So they went through that experience, and then they got the payroll dues deduction back. But yeah, all that to say, I guess the baseline foundation right now in Alabama is already so bad. There's not a lot of room to make it worse. But if there's any attempts, I think we'll know where it's coming from for sure. And I got to say, it's shocking that we've got, I think you said 40 unions decertified. That is remarkable. And I really, I hope that the leaders of the labor movement across the country are really paying attention to this, because this is something that could hit their state. And it's also important as a movement that we don't leave Florida behind, right? Like if we have spare organizers anywhere, like time to bust them out and send them down south to Florida, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that point, I do like have a tiny bit of good news, and that's something I found yesterday, or I learned yesterday, is that there were actually a couple of AFSCME units that did go through the recertification process, and they had their elections, and workers voted unanimously to keep those bargaining units intact.
Nice.
So, and that's the first I've seen. There's been a lot of elections scheduled, but because the state regulating agency is so backlogged, I haven't heard of any other elections where unions have been recertified, but that was like the first kind of victory. And those were two pretty small bargaining units. One was literally 3 employees, and then another was, I think, 108. But that's still a bit of good news on that front. And I think a lot of the teachers unions specifically too will also, like, once they actually get to vote, I think the hardest part for some of these units is just getting that recertification, getting those petitions and those signatures to be able to petition for an election. But I think a lot of these workers, like when they get the chance to vote, it's going to be, we're going to see less. We're not, I guess I expect to see a lot of units vote to keep the unions intact. So
right, absolutely. And I think, and that's got to be the key, and I think there's got to be a lot of internal organizing going on to help make sure that happens. So, and I know that takes resources, right? And that's part of the point of doing this, is to drain the unions of resources. So, but yeah, I really appreciate your reporting on this. I think it's a big story for labor nationally to pay attention to what's happening in Florida.
Yeah. McKenna Schueler, staff reporter for the Orlando Weekly. Really appreciate what you're doing down there and for taking the time to talk to us about it.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really love coming on here, and it's great to talk to you guys.
Yep.
Yeah, appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Yep, talk soon.
Thanks.
Last week in the U.S. Senate, there was a hearing for a bill that would amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to, so right now, when we say that in America we have a 40-hour work week, what we mean by that is obviously not that it is you can only work 40 hours in a week, right? Obviously. That's not what that law means. It means that that's the standard work week. That is the goal that we should set. And then you will be penalized as an employer if you have workers work more than that by paying time and a half. So that's what it means, right? You can work people really as much as you want. I don't think there's actually any at all statutory limitations on how much you can work a person, as long as you pay them time and a half after 40 hours in 1 week. So there's a bill introduced by Bernie Sanders in the U.S. Senate that would bring that down to 32 hours a week. So after 32 hours a week, that would be the new standard work week. After 32 hours, then you'd have to pay time and a half. In addition to that, his bill would actually mandate that employers pay time and a half after 8 hours in a day, even if it's not 40 hours in a work week, and double time after 12 hours in 1 day, which are both eminently reasonable in my view, and should be the law of the land already. And so should the 32-hour work week, although, I know that that's a bit more out there. It's so radical, in fact, that 54% of Republicans support it and 73% of Democrats.
And 64% overall.
Yep.
And we almost got it in the 1930s.
Yep.
We came real damn close to getting it in
the Senate
1930s.
passed it in the 1930s. Yeah, just really, radical stuff, right? The 32-hour work week. But that's how it's being presented. The 32-hour work week is a crazy thing. But it absolutely shouldn't be. It should not be radical, and it should be the law of the land today. And it is great that UAW President Shawn Fain raised the banner for this in the UAW's contract campaign. They didn't win it, obviously. I don't think it was ever in anybody's mind that they would be able to win a 32-hour work week in this round of contract negotiations. But getting people talking about it, raising consciousness on this issue, and encouraging unions to push for it in their contracts, and encouraging legislators to amend the law is great. He spoke at the... Shawn Fain spoke at this hearing, and he talked about the importance of this bill to working people across the country. I have quoted, I've pulled a decent bit of his opening testimony, but I think it's worth it. So let's play that.
I'm here to talk about one of the most important issues to any union leader and any working class person, any U.S. senator, and any human being. And that's our time. As president of the United Auto Workers, I represent 400,000 working class people and 600,000 retirees. And I know when my members look back on their lives, they never say, I wish I would have worked more. When people reach the end of their lives, they never say, I wish I'd have made more money. What they wish for is they wish they had more time. And that's what work does. Work, we are paid for our time. And when we work, we are sacrificing time with other people, with family, friends, and other things we wish to do. But time, just like every precious resource in our society, is not freely given to the working class. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've seen productivity in our society skyrocket. With the advance of technology, one worker is now doing what 12 workers used to do. More profit is being squeezed out of every hour, every minute, and every second. There was a time when this phenomenon was supposed to lead to workers getting their time back, getting some of their lives back. Nearly 100 years ago, economists John Maynard Keynes, spoke of the future of workers' time. His worry that was with all the gains in productivity, we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves, and he predicted a 15-hour work week 100 years ago. In my own union, I go back into our archives and I read about the fight for the 30-hour work week, an idea that was alive and well with our union back in the 1930s and 40s. But today, deep in the 21st century, we find these ideas unimaginable. Instead, we find workers working longer hours. We have workers working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. There are workers, not union or not, working multiple jobs. And they're living to work, and they're scraping to get by, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. We find workers today, later in their life, working deep into their 60s, 70s, and 80s because they can't afford to retire. And we find associated deaths of despair from addiction and suicide, of people who don't feel a life of endless, hopeless work is a life worth living. We have workers who feel despair as a consequence of advances in technology. Workers have been sacrificed at the altar of greed, and they've been stripped of their dignity.
So, as always, very eloquent and poignant comments from UAW President Shawn Fain. And it's important to kind of reset how we think about working and how we think about our wages, because when we think about, how much should you make per hour, I don't think people really understand the value of a person. They're not really thinking about the value of the person's time, that we are selling our time that is finite on this earth to a capitalist, typically, to make them a profit, right? I mean, that there's so much value in a person's time, and we don't put enough value on that, frankly, just, socially, culturally, and certainly economically. And so we have, and what he said about Keynes, thinking that we're going to have so much productivity gains, we're not going to know what to do with ourselves because we're going to have so much free time. And that is just almost exactly the opposite of what happened. In fact, time worked increased. The average time worked per week increased in the 90s. It stayed basically the same since then. And today, nearly 1 in 5 American workers work 60 hours or more. 1 in 5. 18%. That is ludicrous. That is absolutely unacceptable that 1 in 5 American working people have to work 60 hours or more per week. A full 40% work 50 hours or more per week on average. And that is despite the fact that since we passed the 40-hour work week, we are 400% more productive. 400%. We do one person in 1 hour what it would take 4 people to do in an hour when the 40-hour work week was passed. And yet we are not working less. It's absolutely unacceptable. And then when you compare us not even just to our historical, it's funny because in the hearing they mentioned that actually the United States was a national leader in working hour reduction, in work week reduction last century. We were one of the first countries to adopt an 8-hour workday, or to have widespread adoption of an 8-hour workday, to have widespread adoption of a 40-hour work week. And now we have fallen so far behind that the average working person in the United States works months longer every year than a German worker does. Months. That is absolutely insane. insane that we have allowed this to happen. And the reason that this has happened is because even though we are 400% more productive, what does that mean? If you're 400% more productive, that means you are producing quadruple the value per time unit. Quadruple the value. That means quadruple the value is being created. So the question is, where is that going? And it's going to the top. They are getting more money, and we are having to work the same or more amount of hours instead of when quadruple the value is created, we get hours reductions with our pay retained, or we get more of that value coming back to us. Maybe we work the same amount of hours or maybe even more, but we get double the salary. Neither of those things have happened in the United States. Instead, salaries for working people have stagnated or declined in almost every industry, and the work week, like I said, has increased and stayed stagnant. All of the additional value that is coming from the increasing productivity of the American worker is going to people at the top. Absolutely unacceptable. And so the 32-hour work week is one of the many planks in a platform to bring down some of the value that we are creating and spread it among the people who actually do the work, right? So one of those is obviously increasing wages. Another is bringing back pensions. Another is decreasing healthcare costs. And another very important one is decreasing the work week. And so there are a lot of people who would oppose this on the grounds that it would make companies less productive, it would make them less competitive, and it would just be too hard on corporations to meet this demand. Well, there was a person at the hearing who has led a nonprofit study. I can't remember what it was called, but basically they got companies to opt in to a trial program for a 32-hour work week, 4 days a week, and to see what the results were. And I just want to let her tell you what the results were from these companies adopting a 32-hour work week, because it is astounding.
To date, more than 300 companies around the world have taken part in our trials. While the majority are white-collar firms, they do include all sectors: healthcare, mom-and-pop restaurants, manufacturing, construction, retail, nonprofits, IT, finance, professional services, and even a police department in Golden, Colorado. In the U.S., 78% of these are small businesses with 50 or fewer employees, which is similar to the U.S. economy. Our results have been extremely positive for both workers and the companies. We have 26 well-being measures for more than 3,600 employees, every one of which registers improvement from baseline to the end of the trial. Nearly 60% of employees experience better work-family balance. Anxiety, sleep problems, fatigue, physical and mental health improve for 40% of workers. 69% of employees have lower burnout scores. Participants tell us that the new schedule is, quote, life-changing. One person reports that had it not been for the pilot, I wouldn't have had the time or the availability to get medical appointments and procedures, which ultimately led to the early detection of something that might have proved fatal. That something was cancer. In our statistical modeling, we find that the larger the work time reduction, the greater the increase in well-being. Fewer sleep problems and less fatigue are one reason. But the second is that a majority of employees register an increase in their productivity over the trial. They are more energized, focused, and capable, partly as a result of organization-wide changes in work culture and processes. In response to methodological criticism, I will just say here that our findings are robust across time, across place, and industry, and contain a large number of variables to rule out alternative explanations. For employers, the most important number is 91%. That's the fraction of companies who have continued with the 4-day week after at least 1 full year. In the US and Canada, only 2 companies have gone back to a 5-day schedule. Their performance metrics reveal why. Resignations fell 22%. Absenteeism declined 39%. Revenue increased an average of 30%. Some companies report that quality of service improves. After losing 50% of their inpatient nurse leaders during the first 2 pandemic years, Temple University Hospital gave them a 4-day week. Patient outcomes improved, and voluntary turnover fell to 0. If the U.S. adopts a 4-day week, a 32-hour week, it is likely that hourly productivity will rise. That has been the experience of both workers and management in our trials. It is historically what scholars have concluded from past reductions in work time. And it accords with international comparisons. The countries with the highest levels of per-hour productivity are those with the shortest working hours.
So, I mean, really indisputable evidence there of the value of a 32-hour work week. And I think, like she mentioned, the most important metric is that 91% of companies who did the trial for a year kept the 4-day work week. Right. I mean, I think that is not something that I would expect.
Yeah,
right.
We have so many studies. We have evidence from other countries. We have evidence from our past. Like, it is not some wild, far-fetched idea. We know it works.
Right. Yes.
On so many levels.
Exactly. On so many levels. And obviously, and the thing that we're primarily concerned about is obviously the worker well-being and the worker happiness and all of this kind of stuff. And so the data is very robust about that, as it predictably is, right? And I would be in favor of a 32-hour work week, even if the numbers about productivity and efficiency and all of this stuff were not what they are, right? And so I think it's important to point that out, because I do think that even if you lost a lot, you lost some productivity, you lost the equivalent of 8 hours of work because of going to a 4-day work week, I would still support that, because I just think we work too much and we make too little. And so we should get some of our time back regardless of how much productivity the company loses, because by and large, the company would have the money and does have the money to take from the shareholders and the bosses and pay another worker to fill in that gap, to stand in that gap where you lose 8 hours of productivity for moving to a 4-day work week for a person, right? And so that would actually create more jobs.
Right. That's why they were pushing for it during the Depression, right? As you had less work available, so spread it around more equitably.
Yes. So I do want to put all my cards on the table. I support it regardless of what the productivity numbers say. But the productivity numbers are also very robust, and I think demonstrated by the fact that companies, once they adopt it, keep it. I think that is not what I would have expected, but that's what has happened, and that is what has happened even across the kind of idyllic company for a 4-day work week would be like a white collar job, right? Where you can take out coffee breaks or scrolling or something like that and just be more efficient in 4 days. I think that's kind of the thing that people can most understand, makes sense. But you've seen similar results even from manual labor type of jobs. And Sean Fain talked about how there have been studies, very robust and replicated studies that have demonstrated how manual laborers, when after they work 8 hours, every hour that they work, they are less productive. They become less productive. And so particularly after 8 and 10 and 12 hours, once you keep somebody on the line, instead of replacing them with a fresh body, productivity just goes down the tube. And so, even that, if you actually start to think about it for a little bit, it can kind of make sense how in a manufacturing environment or in a manual labor environment, productivity, you don't actually lose the value of that 8 hours of work because it's being replaced by 8 hours of more productive labor. So that's a response to that criticism. Another criticism, which is the exact same criticism that the 40-hour work week faced, is well, actually, let's just play this because it really kind of shows how much these people hate you and hate any protections for you that are guaranteed by the government. Let's just play this.
Government should not be in the business of undermining an employer's ability to keep their doors open with unreasonable and perhaps unconstitutional mandates.
Finally, as an overall point, we commend the committee for starting a discussion about the Fair Labor Standards Act. This is one of the most litigated statutes in the country. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. We need to re-examine it.
So there you go. They're just flat out saying that the Fair Labor Standards Act is unconstitutional and it should be repealed. Not only should you not, workers, you should not get 32-hour work weeks. You do not deserve better. You actually deserve worse. We should repeal the Fair Labor Standards Act and make it so that you don't have to get time and a half after 40 hours in a week. Make it so that you don't have a minimum wage and all of that kind of stuff. They think that is unconstitutional.
Right. I mean, and this is happening at the same time that several major corporations are seeking to get the National Labor Relations Act basically nullified as unconstitutional as well, right? So, and make no mistake, far-right forces and corporate forces have been opposing, these wins from the 1930s since the 1930s, right? They haven't stopped with that, but now I think the scary thing is how much more power they have and how much more wealth they have lined up behind them. So, it's a real concern, I think, and it's a real possibility that we could be looking at labor law regimes that are from, before the New Deal.
Yes.
That should alarm every working person.
Yeah. And so therefore, this is the real issue. They said this in a later segment. This is the real issue.
I want to get back to, though, how I do disagree with trying to do anything from this place.
There you go. They just don't think that laws that help working people are legitimate. They don't think that we should do anything from this place, right? That's just the fundamental crux of it, is that Republicans and conservative ideology opposes any use of state power to make the lives of working people better. That's the long and short, the beginning and end of it.
Right. And I just want to say there's so much more that could be done to make working people's lives better in the United States compared to just other countries, right? Not even getting into dreaming big of what's your ideal society look like, your ideal country look like. No, just compare us to the rest of the wealthy, advanced, developed world, right? Compare our conditions there.
Right.
We had a comment from William in the chat about FMLA and how that's unpaid.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. We should have paid family medical leave in this country for everybody. Right. And I bring it up all the time in the context of Alabama educators, right? A profession that's 80% female and they don't even have paid maternity leave. Mm-hmm. And no one's even talking about it, right? That's the other frustrating thing. So I really appreciate Senator Sanders for getting this in the dialogue and getting this out there in the conversation, using his position as committee chair to have this hearing, to get more people this message, to have Sean Fain there and other folks there testifying. I think that's really important. And it also reveals, what some of these Republicans are really about in terms of, admitting they don't want to do anything to help us.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, there is one more argument that is just that would just say that working people are lazy. The people who are pushing for a 32-hour work week are lazy. They just don't want to work. They don't want to do anything. And Sean Fain responded to that in his opening statement, and we'll end the segment with that.
And I know what people and many in this room will say. They'll say people just don't want to work, or working class people are lazy. But the truth is, working class people aren't lazy. They're fed up. They're fed up with being left behind and stripped of dignity as wealth inequality in this nation, this world spirals out of control. They're fed up that in America, 3 families have as much wealth as the bottom 50% of citizens in this nation. That is criminal. America is better than this. So I want to close with this. I agree there is an epidemic in this country of people who don't want to work. People who can't be bothered to get up every day and contribute to our society, but instead want to freeload off the labor of others. But those aren't blue-collar people. Those aren't working-class people. It's a group of people who are never talked about for how little they actually work and produce and how little they contribute to humanity. The people I'm talking about are the Wall Street freeloaders, the masters of passive income. Those who profit off the labor of others have all the time in the world, while those who make this country run, the people who build the products and contribute to labor, have less and less time for themselves, for their families, and for their lives. So our union's going to continue to fight for the rights of working class people to take back their lives and take back their time. And we ask you to stand up with the American workers and support us in that mission. Thank you.
There you go. While we're talking about the time of workers, I want to make sure that we talk about this, and then we'll see what time it is when we wrap up. We've got 3 more segments that I had prepared for, but we may only get to this one. And that's Ben Shapiro's crusade against retirement. A pretty wild thing to do, but that's what Ben Shapiro did last week. Let's play this first. And so the first thing that happened is he made kind of an offhanded comment a little bit during a show about how retirement's bad, you shouldn't do it. And then after that, obviously there's a big pushback on social media, and so he did a 30-minute defense of his attack on retirement. So we're going to take a look at some of his arguments, but first let's listen to the thing that kicked it off, his comments about how retirement is bad.
And let's be real about this. It's insane that we haven't raised the retirement age in the United States. It's totally crazy. Joe Biden, if that were the case, Joe Biden should not be running for president. Hey, Joe Biden is 81 years old. The retirement age in the United States at which you start to receive Social Security and you are eligible for Medicare is 65. Joe Biden has technically been eligible for Social Security and Medicare for 16 years, and he wants to continue in office until he is 86, which is 19 years past when he would be eligible for retirement. No one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think retirement itself is a stupid idea unless you have some sort of health problem. Everybody that I know who is elderly, who has retired, is dead within 5 years. And if you talk to people who are elderly and they lose their purpose in life by losing their job and they stop working, things go to hell in a handbasket real quick. But put all of that aside, just on a fiscal level and on a logical level. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt established 65 as the retirement age, the average life expectancy in the United States was 63 years old. Today, the average life expectancy in the United States is close to 80. It's totally insane that you believe that you should be able to work from the time that you are essentially 20 to the time that you are 65, which is a 45-year period, pay in, and then you will receive Social Security benefits sufficient to support you and your family, you and your wife or whatever, for like another 20 years. That's crazy talk. That is not fiscally sustainable. The notion that if you have to raise the retirement age to 67 or 68, that everyone is going to fall apart. My parents are that age. My parents are not retired. And they shouldn't retire. It would be very bad for them to retire. By the way, it's disrespectful to people who are 67, 68, 69 years old to suggest that they are in the same shape as people who are 65 were in 1940. It's not true at all. Have you met a 65-year-old lately? 65-year-olds are not old in the United States. They're not. 68-year-olds are not old in the United States. Again, Joe Biden thinks he's not old, and that dude is running for president again, and that dude actually is old, and he's 81. I failed to see how a country in which our entire leadership class is 80 plus is telling you that we should have a retirement age of 65. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah. So, there were a few arguments there, and really all his 30-minute segment defending this, it was just elaboration on that. So I'm not going to play much from that longer defense because it really.
I certainly couldn't take it.
Yeah,
I can't listen to that fella for very long.
There was not much else there. I did pull a little bit, not that long of a clip from the 30-minute defense, but. I wanted to address a couple of things that he said there. One of the things that he said was, it's insane we haven't raised the retirement age, and Joe Biden should retire, because if we think that the retirement age should be 65, then Joe Biden should retire. And it's like, okay. Don't threaten me with a good time, right? It's, that's not a very good argument, I don't think. And I think most people would agree.
Just because the retirement age is 65 is not a demand that you retire at 65. Like, people are free to work as long as they want to.
Right.
But the reality is most people don't have a free choice when it comes to that. A lot of people don't get to retire at 65, right? A lot of people have to work much longer than that because they can't afford to retire. And then there's plenty of people who don't even make it that long, especially poor and working class people whose life expectancy is not as great as the kind of people he hangs around with.
Well, and he talks about, and I really have to question his statement that when everybody that I know who has retired is dead within 5 years. I don't know if maybe the people that he knows is just retiring a lot later, but all the people in my life that I can think of that have retired have lived, well into their 80s and are living right now well into their 80s. I mean, my granddaddy has been retired my entire life. Yes, I have never known my grandfather to be working, right? And he was 60 when I was born. I have never known him to have a job. I mean, it seems almost impossible to think that he was not working when I was little, but I was not aware of it. I wasn't aware of it, certainly, if he was. And he is, like I said, 20 years of retirement. 20 years. And he is only now, in the last 5 years or so, beginning to kind of decline in his health in a really kind of serious way, right?
Well, don't you just love it when really rich people who've never worked a real job tell you how lazy and how greedy you are and how good you have it? Don't you just love that?
Yeah, it's crazy. And my granny, she has never worked for more than like one summer. Her entire life, she has been a housewife or lived by herself without laboring, for a capital. Obviously, she does like reproductive labor and social labor and all of this kind of stuff, right? Obviously. But she's never, quote unquote, had a job for any serious amount of time. And, she has not died. My Meemaw, same thing. She's been retired most of the time that I've known her. Every now and then she'll take a job for a little bit to make a little extra money, and then she'll quit within a year or something like that, right? She's been retired basically all that I've known her. All three of my grandparents have been basically retired my entire life, and they're all doing fine. And now one of the reasons that he says retirement is a bad idea is because, and there is some evidence to his point, is that, people lose purpose or people don't have a purpose. And that is a problem of society that does not have to be fixed by forcing people to labor for a capitalist into their 80s.
Exactly.
Exactly. My grandparents have purpose. My granddaddy is a preacher. He's never made money from being a preacher. Right? He was like an architect or something for his career, but he's been a preacher for 30 years. Okay. And so that gives him purpose. My Meemaw, his wife, is a preacher's wife. So they do a lot of the preacher stuff together, right? My granny, very involved in her church, very involved in her family. She calls her sisters and her brothers every single day. They talk to each other and they do all this stuff. That you do not have to labor for a capitalist to have meaning in your life. And it is an indictment on our society that it is difficult for people to find meaning outside of labor, and we should do everything we can to be building up social institutions that are in fact degrading in our modern world to make sure that people can have purpose outside of work and outside of labor, because that is going to actually be much more meaningful. Because yes, it's true, maybe you can derive, and some people love work and bless them, and they can work until they're 80 if they want. But we shouldn't prescribe work as a way to stave off depression. Instead, we should find, for people who don't love their work, we should allow people to retire and to have institutions that they can slot into or they can expand their participation in to have meaning in their life. Like unions, for example. Retiree clubs in unions, retiree chapters, retiree locals are huge meaning-making institutions for so many people that, again, because of the onslaught from the likes of Ben Shapiro and his friends and his donors, these institutions are being decimated. The church is another institution that, for all the ills of the church, did provide people with meaning. And it would not be bad to have another, to have re-engagement in religion among people in the United States. That would not be bad. I would not be opposed to that. I think it would probably be good for people as far as it goes. And, third place is there's so much that we can do to build up meaning-making capacity in our society beyond work. And we should do that because that would make for a better life for people.
Well, Jacob, I mean, that sounds like snowflake talk because you're talking about like, hey, maybe you could spend time with your grandkids. Maybe you could have enriching hobbies and deepen relationships. But, instead of that, you could be creating surplus value. You could be making numbers go up on the screen.
Yeah.
And so, just putting it out there. I think Ben is just being honest. I actually appreciate that about this little bit of his. He's kind of, just being straight up about the contempt for ordinary people and, the real way in which they look down on folks. We all deserve to retire with dignity, just flat out. Doesn't matter who you are, what you do for a living, what you have done for a living. We all deserve a dignified retirement. If anything, we should be lowering the retirement age. We should be increasing Social Security benefits for folks. And there's a reason why our building trades unions fight so hard to have good pensions, because there's a lot of jobs you just can't do for 40 years, right? Some jobs are really tough on your body. Some jobs are really tough on your mind. Whatever the situation may be, people deserve, after laboring for years of their life, to live a decent retirement. That's not asking a lot. And, it's pretty revealing to put that out there, but, that is the reality that they embrace. That's not for them, right? That's not really for them. They're already semi-retired, right? They already live like retirees in the sense that they don't necessarily have to report to a boss, and except they have unlimited incomes and they have unlimited wealth, and so they can do whatever they want, but they expect the rest of us to work till the day we drop, and that's not acceptable.
Exactly. Another thing that he mentions is life expectancy. He says when it was passed when Social Security was passed, life expectancy was 60, and now it's 80 something. And that is a bit too clever by half because while that is technically true, adults, the life expectancy for an adult in the time that Social Security was passed was not actually that much less than life expectancy today. Life expectancy for an adult when Social Security was passed was in the 70s, right? So it was less than it is today, but not by nearly as much as Ben Shapiro is trying to make it seem to bolster his argument. And so, by the time that you get to be an adult, that's actually the time that you're going to be contributing to the Social Security system. And in fact, before you're 18, you're actually, a net drain on society. You are taking resources without producing anything, right? And so that is where the life expectancy drop or, the degree to which it was less back then. In large part, it was infant mortality, people dying when they were kids, stuff like this, rather than, adults living shorter lives. That's not really exactly what was happening. Infant mortality was the big thing. So, the final argument is he's saying, that this would bankrupt the country, continuing to have the retirement age at the age that it is, would bankrupt the country. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the program, but this is going to be a separate segment when we clip it. So we're going to go over it again, just to reiterate how stupid this argument is. But let's hear it first.
The problem with that is that, of course, they're all going to go bankrupt. So politicians obviously have an incentive to keep kicking the can down the road and pretending that we have unlimited borrowing power and limited money to pay for a ballooning public debt. That, of course, is their incentive structure. But I'm not running for office, so I can tell you the truth, which is that if we don't raise the retirement age or privatize Social Security over time or make any changes to Social Security, we will go insolvent.
Yeah, it's kind of true. If we do not, he says if we don't make cuts, if we don't make cuts, if we don't privatize, if we don't make any changes, then we're going to go insolvent. And it's like, what was that third option, Ben? What was the third thing that you said really quietly and really quickly, even more quickly than the rest of your sentence? If we don't make any changes. What does that mean? That means that there are other things that you could do to prevent Social Security from going insolvent, like raising the Social Security cap. Right now, you only pay Social Security, and I was thinking earlier in the program it was $250,000. Somebody dropped in the chat that it's actually $168,000. You only pay Social Security on your first $168,000. Every dollar you make after that is free from the Social Security and Medicare tax, right? So you have millionaires, people who make $1 million a year, 90% of their income is not taxed for Social Security. It's absolutely ludicrous. If all we did was eliminate the Social Security cap, if that's all we did, and we just had what conservatives in other situations love, a flat tax for Social Security and Medicare. If we just had a flat tax on Social Security and Medicare for all income levels, we would be able to fund Social Security and Medicare for 80 years, for nearly a century, if all we did is have millionaires and billionaires pay the same rate into Social Security and Medicare that you do. That's all it would take. We're not even talking yet about progressive taxation. I mean, God forbid, if we implemented that, we could have it into eternity. But if we just eliminate the cap, it's solvent for almost a century, okay? So the idea that the only options are privatization or cuts is a lie. And they know it's a lie. And so you shouldn't fall for it. You shouldn't fall for it when conservatives and Republicans say that we have to cut Social Security and privatize it because otherwise it's going to be insolvent, because that's just not true. And then you shouldn't fall for it when they turn around out the other side of their mouth and say, I would never cut Social Security, even though I say stuff like this, like what Ben just said, even though I say stuff like Donald Trump just last week saying there are many ways that we could, in terms of cutting, many ways, many things in terms of cutting that we could do for Social Security, or when the majority of Republicans in the U.S. House every single year release a budget that includes cutting Social Security and Medicare. So don't believe them when they say we're not going to do it out of one side of their mouth, because out of the other side of their mouth, they're telling you they're going to do it. They're releasing plans on how they're going to do it. They're going to do it. You give them power. That's what they want to do. Okay. We got 2 more segments. Adam, you want to save them for next week?
It's up to you.
I'd be fine with that. We can save them for next week. Let's do that. So there we go, folks. That's it for us today. TVLR.fm/donate. You can make a one-time or monthly recurring contribution. TVLR.fm/donate. You can also become a patron. Patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. You can also pre-order your TVLR logo cap. Do that before pre-orders close. It's going to be this week, so make sure you pre-order them. TVLR.fm/store. Get your TVLR logo cap this week before pre-orders close. Give us 5 stars if you're listening to us as a podcast. Like the stream on your way out. Subscribe to the channel on your way out. And tell your friends. Share the show. Get your union to sponsor the show. That's a really big help. And if you have a couple of extra bucks, donate to WMMT at wmmt.org/donate. They are the community radio station in Whitesburg, Kentucky that lets us be on their airwaves for free. So show them your appreciation. Donate to them, wmmt.org/donate. Thanks for your time, folks. We will see you next week.